All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Yeah. Okay, so first question. Who's first time in Miami? My goodness, a lot of people. Welcome to Miami. A round of applause for these guys. All right, well, this first panel of this reunion weekend is getting to exit. He knows that I'm going to ask him some funny questions. That's why he's pre-laughing even before we begin. So Shahid, let's just begin with you. We got the Ghibli. These guys are cartoon characters for sure. All right, so let's see. Loom raised what, couple $100 million?
230.
Cool. 10 years, 3 pivots, and sold for $1 billion. Congratulations. So I guess for those who don't know, what is Loom?
It's a great question. So Loom is basically the easiest way for you to record a video message. It records your screen, your camera, microphone, and it all uploads instantly in a shareable URL. Like Zaid said, it started from, it was the result of 3 pivots. So it wasn't what we intended on building. But once we launched it and it had momentum, we're like, this seems like the product we want to build.
Awesome. Well, now that we got that aside, have to ask you about this. You guys made a bunch of money, have a few co-founders. One of your co-founder decides to write a blog post a few weeks ago, and I'm going to quote, "I am rich and have no idea what to do with my life. After selling my company, I find myself in the totally unrelatable position of never having to work again." What's going on? Is he depressed?
Yes. There's no other way to put it, right? But is he doing okay? Yes. I think, was the blog post a little overblown? Yes. Did he expect the reaction that he was going to get? No. So do people know about this blog post? Have they read it? So my co-founder, Vinay, who's our CTO, he's a very extreme guy. I've known him for half my life. We worked at Backplane where I interned first, and then we became roommates, and then became really good friends, and we decided to start a company together with our other co-founder, Joe. And Vinay's personality is someone who's very extreme. So he quite literally, he got into boxing recently, and that's what calms him down. So that's just to give you an insight into who he is as a person. He's one of the most extreme engineers I've ever met in my life. And he goes to, so Loom gets acquired in November of 2023. He stays on for 6 months, doesn't vest his first year. It was an incredible deal for him. But he's like, I've already made money. I don't know why I would stay for another 6 months. A couple weeks in, he regrets that. He goes to Hawaii and opens up his laptop, starts writing this blog post. Released it, I think he tweeted it, put on Hacker News, goes to sleep, wakes up next morning, and people are like calling him, texting him, being like, hey man, I hope you're okay. And he just went through this process where he, started working for Doge. He was like working with Elon, and everyone. There's I think a number of Thiel fellows, by the way, who are working at Doge right now. But it was, I think he quickly realized that he was just trying to, imitate Elon, and he's like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know why I'm doing this. And then he writes this blog post. He's like, I gave up $60 million and made more money than I could have imagined, and now I'm depressed. I don't know what to do. And I'm very curious how you feel about this, but for those that have exited companies, have made some money in the audience, once you, Loom was like a 10-year journey, and once you disassociate your identity from your company, you go through this weird, stressful, borderline depressive period in your life. And then you tag on money to that, and things just get a little hairy. But I think, a lot of founders tend to go through these periods of times where they're like trying to figure out who they are, go on their own journey. So I think it's pretty normal, but I think his reaction was pretty extreme.
Yeah, I mean, he's on the podcast circuit. Certainly gotten a lot of attention after that. My best memory of his co-founder, Vinay, is when he came to Miami a few years ago and didn't get into Bob Zangerlo's Art Basel party. Awesome. How are you, though? You good?
There's no blog post coming out on my end anytime soon. I'm good. I've actually I've had a little head start from Vinay. I left Loom about 2 years ago, so I got to go through the emotions that he went through before he did, and I, luckily surrounded myself around incredible friends who've made some money and got their advice and didn't really go public.
This man just returned from Japan after 2 months learning how to make sushi. So that's why he's so zen at this moment in time. Awesome. Well, Paul, you also have an insane story. How many years have you been building Upstart?
We started in 2012.
So you are the OG AI entrepreneur. You've been using AI for lending for a while. Let's see, 42 billion in loans originated, went public, stock price, 0 to 390, then interest rates go down, right? And then go back up. Stock price goes down to like $10. So that's what, 39 billion to 1 billion? And then today it's what, like 4?
It moves around quite a bit every day, but it's loosely like 40-ish.
How is life being a volatile founder?
Yeah, so I mean, I said to a few people here, I think I am literally the oldest Thiel fellow. So I was back in the class of 2011, and there were a few of us, I just happened to be the very oldest one, and the company that I ended up working on, Upstart, we started shortly after starting the fellowship, but there was probably like a year or two of like wandering in the woods, figuring out what to do before getting to that, and then we went through the whole company life cycle, raised countless rounds of private funding before taking the company public in late 2020, and then Goldman Sachs, our lead underwriter on the IPO, had told us like we had become for a time the most high-performing IPO of all time, which basically meant we had IPO'd at $20 a share, and then we traded up over the next 15 months to 400, and that was just literally like the best sort of IPO return that had ever been seen. But of course, it was like 2021. It was like sort of there was like free money. There was the business itself was actually doing great because it was benefiting from all the same things that stock market valuations were benefiting from, but the actual operating business was getting tailwinds from that, and then the multiples were getting tailwinds from that, and then there was like these crazy Wall Street bets people that had like picked up on all this, and it was just like the perfect kind of the perfect combination of things. And anyways, it's sort of fine. Like I think in the sort of grand arc of building a company that you want to be around for a very long time, like doesn't really matter that much what the stock price is on any given day. You do have like these logistical problems, like you have employees that join and their stock's underwater and like their comp's messed up and you have to like fix that. And there's some like very tactical thoughts on just like 4-year grants and some trouble that they cause and things like this. But on the whole, I think it's fine. I think more companies should just be public, and I think it's an efficient way to get financing.
I think the funniest clip I've seen on Upstart was on CNBC, where a hedge fund analyst basically proposed Upstart as a stock buy, but didn't know what Upstart did. You're basically a meme stock for a while. That was awesome. What was like the morale like? I'm curious. Internally at the company, when things are going so up and down, how do you like keep employees motivated?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, like there's one thing which is just optics. Like everyone likes to see the stock price go up, and it is kind of like annoying if like there is a total disconnect between like what's going on inside the company and what's happening with the stock price, which has happened to us a lot in both directions, where it's just there seems to be very little relationship between the quality of work you're producing as even at sort of a fairly senior level in the company and like what the stock price does. And I think you sort of just have to like accept that and then try to get like everyone to accept that, and then as I said, I think at the end of the day, like nuts and bolts, like people care about like their comp and they care about like how much their like stock is worth, and that number will fluctuate a lot, and so we ended up moving most people to 1-year grants for this reason. I think actually a lot of companies are starting to move this way, and you have these problems with 4-year grants where basically you have this like asymmetric risk reward thing where it's like if the stock price goes up, you happen to join on the right day, the price is up, now you're just locked into making like 5 times like what you thought you were making when you joined this company, and you're going to be locked at that market rate for the next 4 years. But then if the opposite happens and like you join on like the wrong day and it's too high and the stock price goes down, then like you have this very strong expectation that your employer is going to make you whole. And of course, if you just like do the math on that, it just ends up that your actual comp and expectation is like 50% or 75% higher than you expect it to be. And so anyways, I have this whole like rant about the problems of these 4-year grants.
Right. We'll talk more about that in a sec. Shahid, back to you. So over the decade-long journey, you had what, 3 pivots?
2 pivots, third idea.
Okay. Died almost, a couple of times. Some dark moments. You want to talk about the idea maze that led you to Loom?
Sure. So the way we came up with Loom initially was, it was very simple. We had, I think my 2 co-founders and I hopped on a Skype call, and we were using Skype at the time. This was 2015. And Vinay, my co-founder, had a giant whiteboard in his bedroom, and we wrote down a list of ideas. There were like 6 ideas. First one was a problem that I had when I worked as a product designer at Weebly, which was user testing. So as a designer, I would do these I would run these user tests with random people across the country, asking us for feedback on like our checkout flow and the e-commerce flow. So we wanted to make that process better. We called the company originally OpenTest, and I think as most founders go into a startup with a ton of excitement, they're like, this is going to work. We're going to launch this on Product Hunt, and the rest is kind of history. And obviously it did not work that way. So we launched, so the thing about Loom is like we probably launched 4 times before we got our first 1,000 users. And the first time we had launched with OpenTest, it was basically, we built this Chrome extension that would allow you to record your screen, your camera, and your microphone. And it would allow the tester to record these videos and send it back to the product manager or whomever that had created that test. I think total revenue in the first 8 months was $200. And there were 2 of my friends who felt bad for me because we had no revenue, so they just like bought these tests. And they're like, maybe this will help you fundraise. So turns out that like having no revenue is better than having $200 of revenue. So we're like, okay, this isn't working, so we need to pivot. And that was probably after 8 months. Second idea was, a lot of these larger companies, enterprise companies, have experts in-house. They don't need experts from us to, give them feedback on their checkout flow. So we basically built like this intercom-like product that would allow you to embed our JavaScript and run a qualitative user test directly with your users. And I remember both Joe and I, for the first time, hit like a rate limit on Gmail because we were just pumping out emails through like this script that we wrote, begging people to use our product for free. It turned out there were like maybe 3 companies that used it. One of them was Harvard's research lab, and it was like a student who wanted to collect insights on how a specific focus, like they were basically running a focus group, and how this group of people, thought about this like product that they were working on in class. So they got 6 videos back through our Chrome extension, and that PM decided to use the exact same Chrome extension to record a video summarizing what they learned in those 6 videos. So when we saw that in the data, we're like, okay, people want to use this as a generalized communication tool, and they don't want it as like a user testing product. So then we were also like out of money at that point. I think collectively, between Joe, Vinay, and I, we had $43,000 saved up to our names, and we had fully invested all of that. Joe's fraternity brother, Kyle, gave us $10,000. It was a 1-week loan, and that bridge basically helped us launch OpenVid, which eventually became Loom. Launched that on June 2016. Within the first 48 hours, we had about 4,000 people using it, and that's kind of how we scaled.
Wow, 4,000 people in the first 48 hours. Just to double click on that, one of the things that you guys did well at Loom, first of all, how many of you use Loom today? It's like most of the room. I too use Loom. Product-led growth. You guys are really, really good at that. What was sort of the secret kind of unfair advantage there?
Yeah, so it's interesting because product-led growth was just emerging when Loom started to get initial traction. There are companies like Dropbox and Slack who are really, dialed in their onboarding, and like they had referral systems where you can, if you like Dropbox, I remember like 10 years ago, you could basically game theory your way through unlimited storage on Dropbox by referring, tweeting it out. If 10 people sign up, you now have 50 gigs. So we basically studied Dropbox and Slack and a number of other companies, and all we did was we copied them. We didn't create anything new. We literally just looked at their referral pages, and I whipped up a design, and I was like, okay, for the first referrer, you get $5 in future Loom credits, which we didn't start monetizing after 4 years after launching. So, and that was also a problem in and of itself because there was like some influencer on YouTube who like shared out this referral link, and she had like, kid you not, like $250,000 in Loom credits. And we're like, we don't know how to like pay her back for this. So it's, so we ended up capping it. We, made our onboarding a little bit better. A lot of students and teachers use Loom to this day, but they provide almost no value to the company other than just using the product and driving up our engagement. 90% of our revenue comes from companies and individuals using it. So it's, we for the longest time, a lot of our investors try to get us to become a sales product or a, product, like a PDE product. And we decided we were pretty bullish on wanting to just be a generalized communication tool for the workplace. And I think that ended up working in our favor.
That's awesome. Paul, I know your background, you went to Yale, CS, you wanted to become a quant trader. Why lending? What was the insight there? And what does Upstart do that's better from a lending decision-making perspective than, say, a JP Morgan?
Yeah, so the summer that I dropped out of college with the fellowship, I spent at D.E. Shaw, which was this quant fund in New York, and that's probably like the alternate version of my life story where I didn't end up starting a company and didn't do the Thiel fellowship, and so I was always interested in that kind of stuff, and it struck me at D.E. Shaw that it was like you have some of the probably like very smartest people in the world that are just like working on an incredibly sort of narrowly defined problem, which is this problem of like how do you like sort of arbitrage securities prices just like a little bit and make the market a little bit more efficient, and you can sort of have a debate about how valuable that is or isn't, but clearly there's sort of like a ton of sort of human and technology power being applied to this very narrow problem. And it was a really intellectually interesting problem, but not one that seemed like very deeply connected to sort of like most of what happens in people's lives. And so I wanted to kind of like take the same, essentially like the same technology practice and apply it to a problem that would sort of touch a lot more people's lives in a tangible way. And so you sort of like just make like a small leap from kind of this like corporate sort of securities arbitraging to like personal like sort of finance arbitraging, and you very quickly get to the sort of personal risk issues, and so in some sense it's sort of like exactly the same thing. And in fact, my just a couple weeks ago we announced that my old boss's boss from D.E. Shaw, this guy who was like the chief risk officer at the time I spent the summer there, I convinced him to join our board. So it really is like the same kind of company, but it's like applied in a a consumer domain that sort of solves a tangible problem people have, which is the inability to access credit at good terms. But the first version of Upstart, and similarly, we also had like this wandering period. The first sort of packaging of the product was too complicated. We sort of said, hey, we're going to build these models. We're going to figure out which people will be successful in the future, but we're going to do it in an income share agreement version. That version of Upstart was actually much more popular with sort of like highbrow class. So it was like we were like always on like CNBC and Bloomberg and stuff talking about it. That was the version of Upstart that like Founders Fund wanted to put money into, and they did. And so that's sort of like almost all our investors put money into the company because ISAs were so exciting as a concept. You could really give like a kind of like evangelical pitch for why like income sharing was the future. It was so much structurally better than loans, and so I certainly was on the conference circuit saying this like all the time. And it just turned out to be like a non-business in every way. And then we were like, okay, well, really the sort of interesting part of the technology that we're building is not specific to income share agreements. It's just like we're better at figuring out which people are going to be financially successful and therefore able to give you your money back in the future. And that really the simplest way to apply that is to give people loans. And most people coming to Upstart were like, yeah, I need money, but like, can you just tell me what my APR is on this? And we had this whole answer that's like, no, you're missing the point. There's no APR. It scales up and down as a function of your income. And people just didn't want that. They wanted to know how much money they had to pay back in a deterministic way. And so eventually we gave people what they wanted, and that made a business. And then like all the investors were like, this is a boring business. I'm not interested anymore. And of course that's the business that we ended up taking public. So.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I mean, I think you might be an authority on the subject, given that you serve literally millions of consumers from a lending perspective. Tariffs, macro situation, does that matter to you?
Yeah, the business definitely is like very macro sensitive. I mean, all lending is, and we're certainly subject to that as well. The forces that affect our business are like interest rates. I mean, are just sort of almost like a cost of business not in the direct sense for us because we're not exactly a balance sheet lender, but basically we do lend using the balance sheets of lots of banks, credit unions, private credit funds, like all of the sort of above, and all of them borrow money based on what prevailing interest rates are, so that sort of directly ends up flowing through to the cost of a loan to the consumer. So our business, in some sense, is very simple. It's kind of like there's an APR that goes to the end consumer. If that APR is lower, like more people get loans. If it's higher, less people get loans. And one of the pieces of that is the risk-free rate. So that going up and down affects us. And then but the biggest piece of that, and really like one of our kind of like core focuses as a company was like for at least consumer loans, there is a very significant non-zero chance the person doesn't pay you back. And so that risk component is actually in many cases a very large part of the APR stack. And that's the part we work on getting down. And there's like, the thing we can do, which is like we can be really good at the sort of like applied machine learning, get good at figuring out like which people in this room are more or less likely to pay back. But then there's like just like a macro thing that has nothing to do with the sort of borrower level separation. It's just like if, and the big thing that happened to us in 2020 and 2021, there was massive amount of stimulus. That was like, it basically made it so that every single person, regardless of the type of person, saw their likelihood of defaulting on any kind of loan go down by something like 60%. Like it was a massive change, never before seen in any of the data, probably in all of recorded economic history. And then like stimulus ran out and ended, and when stimulus ended, it was like the greatest sort of negative shock to the sort of population of people with debt that you could really ever engineer, because you could imagine that, you hear all the stuff where it's like the average American doesn't like save any money and then whatever, they're living paycheck to paycheck. There's some truth in that, but of course that is concentrated truth in people that are net borrowers, and people that are net borrowers are already sort of like, it's like every last dollar is being used. That's why they're net borrowers. And then suddenly, you have this thing where you get like 10% inflation, and also like the stimulus checks that they were getting and using every last cent of suddenly disappear, and it's like this crazy shock. So then you go from, default rates are 60% lower than normal to defaults are like 100% higher than normal. So it's like a tripling of default rates in the span of like 3 months, and which is sort of like was also a big real shock to our business. And anyway, so those are some of the things that like affect us, and The tariff stuff, we look at through that lens, so we definitely think of inflation as a significant sort of adverse risk to the business. But on the other hand, the thing that like really in the end matters to us is something that's called the personal savings rate, which is like a Fed measure that gets published every month, and it's basically just exactly a measure of people's like inflows and outflows. And so in some sense for our business, we're like counter-cyclical in the way that lower consumer confidence is excellent for us. Like all we really want is people to stop spending money. And if they stop spending money, like most of your businesses will suffer, but like my business will do great because I just need people to like be able to pay loans and then I can make them loans, and sort of demand for credit is infinite, and approvability of credit is like a function of if they're responsible with their money.
That's awesome. Wow. There's so many follow-ups I could ask to that. But going back to you, Shahid, working with co-founders, quite hard, right? A co-founder is basically getting married. It's a marriage you can't break easily either. If you were to start all over again, what would you look for in the perfect co-founders?
So I have to say, the two co-founders that I have, I was really lucky because I think most founder relationships break when there's just not great communication. And because
you want to expand on that?
So oftentimes it's just a lack of like knowing how to communicate to your co-founder. So there's already a lot of stress with building a company, as all of you already know. And when you add on top of that expectations of someone else with your own work, and you feel like you're doing your actual work, but you don't know how to communicate that to them, that builds like a level of animosity over time. And then, there's a reason why like executive coaching is like a massive industry, and there's a bunch of people who have never been executives who are executive coaching, and they're making a ton of money doing it. It's a pretty big grift, but there are a lot of great, I have to say, shout out to Khalid, he was my executive coach. He's a great guy. And I think most founder relationships break. Like you said, founder relationships are marriages. There's also like, solo founders who struggle just as much as those that have 3 or 4 other co-founders. If I were to go back in time and, figure out, redo something with my co-founder relationship, I probably would have gotten an executive coach earlier. We got someone, I think, around the Series B stage. But it just made things harder, right? So we started the company as really good friends. Every morning we'd wake up, it was like 6 a.m., we'd do stand-up. Someone would be making coffee, someone would jump in the shower, we only had one bathroom, and the other person would start responding to support tickets. And then at 8 a.m. we would go to the gym together. So it was a lot of together time, and I think I probably would have separated that because I think we were just getting a little too claustrophobic with one another. But yeah, I think we endured, 10 years, and we're still really good friends. I was just on a ski trip with them 2 weeks ago. So it's, I think this, from my observation and my experience, the strongest founder relationships are kind of predicated on solid communication. Whatever you could do to get that solid communication, and whether it's like a safe space like executive coaching or marriage counseling, I know some founders do that as well. Whatever you have to do, I think solid communication is like what kind of keeps companies together. I think there's some stat out there, I'm probably misquoting it, someone asked ChatGPT, it's like 60% of companies fail not because they run out of money, but because communication breaks amongst founders.
Yeah, it's crazy. I guess, last question for both of you, since we're running a little bit over time. If you were to give advice on, each of you have built companies over, 10 plus years, that journey from, when the idea doesn't work, you have $800 in revenue, to, going public.
200.
200, or getting acquired, that kind of journey, what's sort of, if you were to like succinctly put it in a single sentence, what is that? Resilience, communication, persistence, don't give up, all of the above?
I don't know, I don't have any great insights. Like, build, if it's like one sentence, you get to an exit, man, that's a lot of pressure. Maybe just like, I don't know, build great things. Yeah.
It's as easy as that. Make something people want. Shah?
If I can't pick communication because that is my number one, I would say, I mean, whatever you're doing, I hope you enjoy it because it is obviously a long journey, and I know a lot of you personally have been running companies for more than a decade. So, you know, I think it's like enjoy what you're doing. It's a long journey. Take the high road every time. Don't take shortcuts. Don't enlist any people into competitive companies and pay them for data for $5,000 a month. But yeah, just take.
You know
the
what's
high
funny? Alex is actually a friend of mine. He was, I'd invited him to this.
road. I hope he's not here.
Yeah, no, he's not.
But yeah, I take the high road and have fun while you do it.
Awesome. To Shahid and Paul. Amazing. Well, we have a sort of packed agenda today. Up next, Brent Saunders and Constantine.
All right, everyone, thank you. I'm really excited to be here. I'm actually the oldest Thiel Fellow. No, that's not true. My name's Constantine Karitas. I'm a partner at Reed Smith, as a law firm. We do a lot of work with all the guys here in Miami, Valerian, Brent, and a whole host of others, very active in investing in the space as well. Love the idea behind Valerian and happy to be an investor as well in that project. But you're not here to hear from me. You're here to hear from my great friend, client, Brent Saunders, who was the CEO and chairman of Bausch & Lomb, and before that has built and sold some of the most prestigious pharma and life sciences companies, some of which are big brand names like Allergan and Valiant. And in doing so, Brent has established himself as one of the premier leaders in business, whether it's life sciences or not. And the idea today was to learn a little bit from Brent about what it takes to be a great leader and what does he do that might be of interest to you all as you continue to build your successful companies. So Brent, why don't we jump right into it. One of the things we were talking about earlier was dealing with adversity as a way you understand how someone can lead. And today we have, at least as affects your business, some tariffs that we're thinking about and how we're going to deal with it. And I know that's top of mind for you. Do you want to use that as an example of how you kind of think through a crisis or a challenge and how you go about working it with your team?
Yeah, so thank you guys for having me. First of all, I have to say I've never seen Constantine in a suit, so I don't.
Who is that?
If it were just a black T-shirt, it'd be much more believable. But
Wow.
yeah, no. So great question. Look, as I was thinking about founders, and I do invest a lot with founders. I sit on a board of a bunch of startups. One we all know well, Rome, which I'm chairman of. There is a lot of key themes that you see in great founders. And I'd say in my top 3 or 5 attributes, it's dealing with adversity. And you can have, and we saw with Upstart, you were kind of explaining it a little bit there. You can have a great business model, you can have a lot of success, but ultimately you're going to hit a wall of adversity. And how do you work through that kind of adversity? For me, this week was really interesting. My current company that I'm chairman and CEO of is Bausch & Lomb. We're an eye care company. We make everything for the eye, from lasers to implants to pharmaceutical eye drops to the things you buy at CVS or Walmart for your eye to contact lenses. And we sell in 130 countries around the world. And I have 36 manufacturing facilities, and I ship a lot of product everywhere in the world. And so we had anticipated tariffs, right? And so like all things with adversity, you have an inkling something's coming, right? So after the election, we started to look at moving inventory We increased inventory a few $100 million on our balance sheet, making sure we could warehouse componentry and other things, particularly from China and Mexico, knowing that they were real targets of potential Trump tariffs. But then all of a sudden, you can wake up one day and the world can be in chaos. And let's put aside the stock market reaction, because we're also a public company, and the issues you have there with investors. And I have some interesting investors this time, including some activists, Carl Icahn and John Paulson, that I have to deal with. In this and that's adversity, but we can talk about that kind of adversity later. I've dealt with them in the past, so I know them well. But could you imagine, a company like ours, when you hear the president give a speech on a Wednesday afternoon, 4 o'clock, and all of a sudden you realize it's a couple $100 million top line implication. You wake up Friday morning and China imposes a reverse tariff, and that's another $100 million. And every day you're waking up to some substantial things. And I think, founders, it may come in different ways, right? Something may happen with a competitor, something may happen with your product, something may happen in the market, but it's how you deal with adversity. And so the first thing I would say, which is really quite simple, and we heard it a little bit from Shade, communication, right? So I have my team in a war room-like situation around tariffs. We actually use Rome, so we're all on Rome. So a plug for Howard there. And we just basically, started to communicate around how do you deal with these things. So communication is clearly an important attribute to working through. I'm sure you would agree with that, of working through adversity. But another one that has happened to me, over 30 years of running companies, it's pure leadership. And so if you look harried, or if you look aggravated, if you look like the sky is falling, as a leader, you need to be the voice of calm and commitment and focus. And so what I kept saying to my team is, I never got excited, I never get worked up. I just say, we're going to work through this. Here's the action plan. Here's the 10 things we need to do. Who has any other ideas? How do we create the action plan to work our way through this and solve a problem? And so it's a lot of communication, it's a lot of leadership, it's a lot of demonstrating that regardless of a situation outside of your control, because a lot of adversity, some is self-imposed, but a lot of it is things that you're just not going to control. It's actually demonstrating that calm focus and really optimism that we've got the right team. We know what we need to do. We have to focus on execution. We're going to work through this. Every company that ships stuff around the world is going to have to deal with this as well. And let's do it better than they can. And I always look at it as there's an opportunity. Where do our competitors make their products? Well, most of them make them outside the U.S. as well. How do we do it better than them so that perhaps we don't have to raise prices when they do? How do we impact the hit to margin? How do we deal with it? But in a very calm, methodical, thoughtful way is really key for me in terms of leading through adversity. And you'll face it in every situation, and frankly, on a fairly regular basis.
Thanks, Brent. I have seen you up close and personal, kind of maintaining that calm demeanor and just kind of taking in all the facts that are out there.
By the way, it's like a duck, though. Like, inside, I'm freaking out. So just to be fair, I'm like, fuck, this is horrible, right? but I don't let them know that.
Yeah, no, I think you do an amazing job of that.
Yeah.
But part of being able to then execute the action plan that you come up with in that kind of with that kind of perspective is having the right team around you. And I think it's important for everyone here as they build their businesses. What are the most important attributes that you look for in senior level team members when you look to add to your business?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and I think many of you would agree with this. But even at Allergan, at our height, I had about 86,000 employees around the world, and we had great products. Many of them, like Botox was one of my products. And so people would always say, oh, you're the Botox company. We made a lot of other stuff, and it was a great product. But I would always say to folks, or even Bausch & Lomb, 14,000 people, our most precious, our most important thing we have in our company is our talent. And people are what make the difference between okay companies and great companies. And so I have a relentless focus on talent. And it's easy to say, it's hard to do. And I'll give you an example from just yesterday. Long scheduled, so we dealt with it even though we were dealing with a lot of tariff stuff yesterday. I had a 4-hour meeting with my executive team reviewing talent, and I try to do it once a quarter. And what I make them do is put the list of their direct reports and their direct reports, so 2 layers, right? And we go through, and I use succession as the word, even though it's not really. And I say this to them, we're not really planning for succession. I don't care if you get hit by a bus, we'll figure it out, that kind of thing. I mean, I care, but I don't, that's not the exercise. The point is, if we don't have several options to fill every seat if someone were to leave, we don't have depth of talent. And that's why we do this exercise. And what you learn very quickly is a couple things. Human emotion, which is very real. People like the people that work for them, and they feel protective of them. The second thing is everybody, including me, has blind spots. We think people who are really good because they manage up really well, but they don't manage down as well. And I really try to do it, and I'm still perfecting it 30 years later, but I really try to do it in a very open way. And so, for example, my head of research was talking about how great one of his key people are, and she's a terrific scientist, brilliant, but she's managing a very large organization of a couple thousand people, and no one likes her. And when I started to dig in, preparing for the meeting, why does no one like her? She doesn't return anybody's phone calls. She doesn't work within the team. She's a silo player. And he was going on raving about her accomplishments. She got this drug approved, she got this product approved, everything we have is regulated. And I said, look, Yahia, that's our head of R&D, no one likes her. And the reason no one likes her is she doesn't return any phone calls, she doesn't communicate, she doesn't work with the businesses. And he said, well, she's a great technician at getting things approved. I said, be that as is may, she's a vice president. And those skills are good enough to be below a vice president, but once you get to VP, it flips on you. We assume you're a technical expert. You better be, or you shouldn't be there. But if you don't know how to work with the team, how to advance objectives, how to be strategic with the businesses that need those products, you don't deserve that seat. And if you can't get her there, then she's got to leave. And here's the timeline to do it. And we did that, times 100 with people. And I make people do it in front of their peers because everybody has blind spots. And we have a very open discussion. Now, there are other harsher ways to do that, but it is really important, I think, as a leader, as a CEO, as a founder, to really very systematically and routinely, whether it's once a month, once a quarter, twice a year, you'll figure out your cadence, but really sit and talk about the talent, the gaps, the opportunities. The reverse is true. We find somebody and we say, this person's really talented, but they're blocked because their boss is super talented. Let's move them over here. Let's put them in Germany and let them run Germany. Let's give that person or give that woman a chance to really blossom too. So it's not just about the down, it's also about finding the talent and giving them opportunities to shine. But I spend a lot of time on that, and I know my counterparts in big pharma do not. The HR department may do it, or they do it in different groups or in the annual review cycle. But for me, it's something that has to be done relentlessly because people make great companies, not great products.
Thank you, Brent. And I think that bears true as I've been in situations where I've run into your former colleagues, former C-suite execs, all of whom have really good things to say about you. Even in hard times, I think having what I would describe as a transparent, direct, but very fair approach, I think has served you well.
I don't know if I was always that way. To be
And
fair,
that's what I was going to ask. I said,
Yeah.
maybe as you've gotten a little older, I don't want to say
and
you're old,
maybe,
although
you
in
know,
this
I
crowd
never
you're very
believed
old.
this, but maybe experience creates a little bit more wisdom. When I was younger, I still think of myself as young, but then I look
Me
at
too.
in this room, and it ruins it a little bit for
I don't
me.
think anyone's buying it, but
Yeah.
I feel very young too, Brent.
But you know, when I first
Although
became
this is not helping, but go ahead.
when I first became CEO of a big company in my 30s, I wanted everybody to like me, and I actually really cared about that. And I made a lot of mistakes because I cared about that. And it took me a few years and a few huge mistakes, and I believe you learn the best lessons from your mistakes around caring if people like me. In fact, one of my top executives who has the highest potential really cares what his team thinks about him. And I took him to dinner a week ago, and I said, I love that you care, but you got to stop. People will respect you if you lead for the right reasons, transparently, ethically, and you do the right thing, but they don't have to like you. That's a byproduct that maybe it comes, maybe it doesn't, but you got to get that out of your thinking, because you'll be a much more effective leader if you're just doing the right thing than worrying about if everybody likes you.
So you have been doing this quite some time and at a really high level with great successes. How do you stay motivated to continue to do? You don't have to do this. But what drives you? What inspires you to continue to lead companies like this?
Yeah, it's funny. I was listening to the comment of I forget the guy's name who wrote the blog that Zaid was talking about. Yeah. I'm like such the polar opposite of that. I remember when I sold my first company, I sold it for $9 billion, and I sold it on a Friday, and I was excited to start something new on Monday. And I don't, this may sound weird, but it's not, I don't use money as the scorecard. I use creating new things, creating new products. I happen to have the benefits societally of working in healthcare. And so for coming up for a new cure for a disease or a new treatment for something that doesn't exist, or a new product for people who are in pain or suffering or impaired vision, motivates me more than the paycheck. And you know, and I think a lot of founders have this. I don't enjoy weekends. I mean, I get antsy to get back to work on Monday. I don't enjoy vacations. I like the idea of vacations. My wife and kids will say, oh, let's go to Italy for a week. I'm so excited to go. Day 2, I can't wait for it to be over to get back in the office. So, you know, I think you have to figure out what motivates you. I don't think I've ever been in a position outside of when we sold out. I sold Allergan for $83 billion in May 9th of 2020. And as you know, what happened in May of 2020 is the world shut down. And so that caused me to have a bit of a pause. But immediately the next day, I rented office space. I started my own family office. I started investing, working with founders. I just figured out, what can I do to be intellectually committed to something, even you know, I had this great personal and professional success. That doesn't motivate me. It's about doing something.
And I appreciate that. And even outside of Bausch & Lomb, you're active in bringing new products to market, one of which is important to me and my family is Nepi. You just want to mention that real quickly? You were a big investor and driver of that company.
Yeah, that actually was a spring of 2020. So both my older daughters have food allergies, and they're also very needle phobic. And so most people with an EpiPen, you know, they actually describe it as stab yourself with the EpiPen, right? Like it sounds very violent. And having created Botox and convincing women to take the most dangerous neurotoxin and then put it in their face to look good, which sounds, today it's obviously everybody does it, but think of the idea of saying, let's create the most deadly neurotoxin and convince women to put a needle in their face and look better. It worked. But you know, but interestingly, with epinephrine or Epi, the EpiPen, it's really hard. People don't want to do it. And when you look at most deaths related to food allergy, or anaphylaxis it's called, most of those people have died with an EpiPen in their possession because they wait too long or they never use it. And so, I found a scientist who called me, it was actually May of 2020, and said, I have an idea. Let's take the Narcan device. You guys know what the Narcan device is. It's generic now. Let's take that device and put epinephrine in it and see if we can create a nasal one-shot competitor or replacement for EpiPen. Sounds easy to do, technically really hard to get epinephrine to work that way. But we worked on it, we raised money, we worked on it for 4 years. We actually wound up doing a reverse merger IPO to raise, we found an oncology company that raised $400 million, did a phase 2 study, it didn't work. So we were sitting there with a shell with 360 million. We reverse merged. It was an OrbiMed company that gave us more money to finish the development. And then just 6 months ago, we got it approved by the FDA. And so now it's widely available. You'll start seeing in May, you'll start seeing TV commercials. And it's about that big. So even, my daughters, when they have a purse, like, I'm not putting the EpiPen in there. It doesn't fit. I can't put my phone in the EpiPen. So now we've solved size. We've gotten rid of needles. There's no downside to taking epinephrine. If you're wrong, maybe you feel a little head rush for 30 seconds or a minute. And so what we really hope is we found an innovation. We got intellectual property around the combination of the two. So we have protection for 20 years. And we brought something to market that hopefully makes a lot of money, but most importantly, saves a lot of lives.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah.
So just a couple more questions.
And by the way, a lot of adversity. The first time we filed this submission after spending $100 million, the FDA rejected it.
Yeah.
They rejected it because to approve it, it had to be similar to the way blood, your epinephrine absorbs in your blood when you shoot it in your leg. And we were slightly better. And the FDA rejected it on those grounds. And we had to go back and refile it. It took another 18 months to prove to the FDA it was still safe.
Couple more questions. So what are your proudest accomplishments as a leader? And I'm not talking about having sold this company or that company, but something, more personal perhaps in terms of things you've managed to do.
Yeah, it's a tough, I would say it's a tie between two things. At Allergan, we were quite large in neuroscience, and in particular, mental health. And that's where I spend most of my personal philanthropy. I have a daughter who has some significant issues in this area. And so creating new mental health drugs was really important to me, and we did. We got one across the line called Vraylar. It's on course to do about $4 billion this year. But interestingly, we also tried to create a novel way to treat depression, based loosely off of the theory of ketamine. People have been using ketamine. Ketamine is a very dirty drug, has a lot of psychomimetic side effects. It's got a lot of other issues. It does, however, work in instances of severe depression, particularly suicidality. So if you show up at the emergency room and you're suicidal, ketamine could be a really effective option, but a really dirty way to treat it. So we spent a lot of chemistry time trying to synthesize the way that drug, ketamine, works, clean it up, and create a novel, clean version of it. Spent $800 million doing that, and it failed. And I'm still really, really proud of it because we tried. And so a failure, believe it or not, is one of them. I got a lot of grief from investors too, but that was worth it. The second one is when I look back over my career, 17 years as a CEO, and it's kind of like the coaching tree. Like all the people who work for me that are CEOs today is just enormously gratifying. And I don't keep an exhaustive list, but it's well over 40 or 50 of them. Oh, wow. And so it's really cool when I hear from people on LinkedIn or otherwise, text or email, that say, hey, I just became CEO. Thank you. I learned a lot when I worked at your company. So.
You're the Bill Belichick of life sciences, I think.
I don't know, but I don't have Super Bowl rings. I didn't have Tom Brady either.
Last question. What advice do you have for this group of leaders and aspiring leaders or leaders who want to continue to grow what they're doing? What would you tell them from your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys know this, but you know, really be committed and passionate about what you're doing. You know, you saw the success, these great successes that were up prior, 10 years, 12 years. Success isn't overnight, and there are going to be days, weeks, months, even years where you think you're wasting your time. It's frustrating, it's annoying, but you know, there's a certain you know attribute that I think you would agree with, of this just drive to succeed, right? We may have to pivot, we may have to slightly change the way to market fit, but man, we're gonna make it, and we're gonna walk through mountains. We're gonna do what it needs to do. And then the second thing that I've seen, the mistake that I've seen from many founders, is trying to do too many things at once. They create this product, and then they start hanging this on it, that on it, that on it. And you know, I always go back. I forget the years, but you know, when I read the Jeff Bezos book several years ago, the only thing I remember is he sold books, I think, for 12 years, and everybody tried to convince him, sell this, add this to Amazon, do that, and he said, I'm not doing anything till I perfect books. And that one lesson is something I always say to folks: be really good at something before you start doing the second thing. Once you have one thing mastered, sure, add the second thing. But too many people, if you think you got to hang more things off, you probably have a product fix. You should pivot and do the other thing really well. And don't be afraid to walk away in that pivot to do the thing you can do really amazing. So.
That's really great. Thank you, Brent.
Yeah.
I think it was really, really helpful and that's a good question. Thank you.
I think we should buy him that suit.
Amazing. Well, another round of applause for these guys. Botox. Awesome.
All right. Well, great to be here. Great to see so many friends here in Miami, and it was also awesome hosting the event last night. And just huge shout out to Zaid and Nick for being great partners on this and helping us put this together. Going to be really tough to follow up those first two panels, which were amazing. Also my first time moderating a panel, so we'll see how this goes. Yeah, let's just get started. If you each just want to introduce yourselves and tell us, you know, what your business is and how long you've been working on it, and yeah, just tell us a little bit more about yourselves and your businesses. So Lonnie, you could start.
Okay, cool. My name is Lady Lazari. My company is Simple Sugars. We are an all-natural skincare line for sensitive skin. So we manufacture and sell skincare products out of our facility in Pittsburgh, PA. We're a direct-to-consumer e-commerce company, and we've been in business for almost 19 years now. I'm old.
What's up, everybody? My name is Jordan DeSico. Founded Super Coffee, which is a better-for-you coffee company, in 2016. Thiel Fellowship class of 2017. So going on year 10 here. And yeah, we're excited to talk about everything that we're working on and some of the learnings that we've had along the way.
Hey guys, Ed Backel. Founded a bunch of different companies, probably most notably Glorify, 5-6 years ago. Largest for-profit Christian app in the world. But now in diabetes.
Awesome. Yeah, just I guess to introduce myself, I'm Joey Levy, founder and CEO of Better. We're a sports gaming and media business based here in Miami. So the topic for this panel is focused on how to build a great consumer business. So I guess just tactically, maybe each of you could provide one or two of the best things that you've done from both a product and distribution standpoint for each of your businesses. Ed, how about we start with you, and you could talk about Glorify or the new company, or just but one or two of kind of the secret weapons that have really worked for you.
I mean, I haven't got there with the new company yet, but I think, you know, before you build anything that's worth distributing, you've got to get something retentive. I think the minute that I did, and I'd really figured out all the right kind of viral loops, I got very lucky with different celebrities around the world. So whether it was like the Kardashian family or Michael Bublé, Jason Derulo, you name it, and then kind of hundreds across Brazil and Latin America. Yeah, it kind of started there in trying to build a product that was really easy to promote, whether you were just a regular user or someone with a massive audience. But I think, yeah, the first thing I did was create something that people were really proud to push. And so rather than them kind of just sharing it for the sake of sharing it, people shared it because it made them look cool, I suppose. And so, I ended up with people with, hundreds of millions of followers across Instagram, socials in general, all promoting Glorify because, it made them look like they were a good Christian, I suppose, in some ways, which helped. But anyway, there's more to say on that.
Yeah, I guess to double click on that real quick, so you had these celebrities, influencers that you started working with, and it sounds like, I guess some of them were kind of sanctioned directly with the company and you had like these brand awareness deals with them, and then some of them were more just organically picking up the product because it made them look more kind of wholesome. Is that kind of?
Yeah,
And then one thing that I always think about on my end, sorry to cut you off, is just like this kind of tension between like allocating money towards like celebrities, influencers, and more brand awareness related marketing spend, and also that performance marketing muscle that's really important for consumer apps like this. So if you could also maybe talk a little bit about kind of how you sort of allocated resources between performance and brand and celebrities and influencers.
Yeah, well, the funny thing I would do actually is I'd go into different markets and set up kind of sub-entities, especially in places like Brazil or Mexico. I'd find there were, lots and lots of hallmark celebrities that I wanted to get to back the product, but they were never interested in owning 0.1 or 0.25% of the company. And so I'd set up different entities in those geographies and say, okay, you can have 3 or 4 or 5% even of this company in Brazil. And I do that with kind of 4 or 5 hallmark celebrities, often letting them invest at the same time. And then there was this kind of like nuclear fission type effect where when this person was on, 10, 20 others would come with them. Yeah, but it's funny because the other thing I did was I'd let them invest at earlier rounds. And so I'd rather than paying big celebrities to kind of back the product, I'd let them come into our Series A before I knew the valuation was about to 10x from, 40 million to 500 million, for example. Yeah, I'd actually kind of argue against ever paying a lot of the larger influencers because the unit economics just don't really kind of map out. Yeah, performance marketing is a whole, another beast.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I guess, Jordan, what are some of the top 2 things that have really been beneficial to you as you've scaled Super Coffee to where it is today?
Well, we've gotten a lot of shit wrong over the years, a lot wrong, and we learned a lot along the way. But I think the most important things that we did well early on was kind of create almost a handcrafted experience in CPG in a category that had never been innovated in, which is ready-to-drink coffee. It was kind of owned by Starbucks when they launched the Frappuccino in the 90s, and it was sugar-laden and artificial, and it was about a $4 billion category at the time. And this was 2015, and kind of cold brew coffee was just starting to have a name for itself. And I was a freshman student athlete. I played at Philadelphia University, and I just wondered why there wasn't something that was better for you in the coffee space. I loved coffee. I wouldn't do energy drinks, etc. So I just started by making something that I loved for myself, and iterating and putting that out there and being vulnerable with my teammates who would make fun of me all the time, my classmates, my teachers, and then we kept that process kind of going for the first 2 years while I was still in school. And we literally went one store at a time. Our distribution strategy was one Whole Foods at a time in the Mid-Atlantic region from Philly down to DC. We did our own manufacturing, our own distribution. And the critical part about those years was how much we learned, the consumer feedback. We spent our weekends doing sampling events at Whole Foods, and we were just speaking with thousands of customers. Most of them became some of our early investors as well, so we got that plus benefit as well. But yeah, for us, it was just creating the best product possible and really forcing product market fit from consumer feedback in real time. We were able to implement changes, week over week, and we kept getting better and better. And then as we scaled the business, we kind of went market by market. Again, we made a lot of mistakes throughout the way, but those early learnings that we had propelled us, over the years when we were really in hyper growth mode.
And how many Whole Foods and other retailers are you in today?
We're in about 100,000 stores now. Yeah, so we're the number 2 brand in the category, and again, a lot of ups and downs, but we're the sole coffee for Anheuser-Busch, so we leverage their distribution network nationwide. We have some international relationships as well, but we still have a long way to go. Starbucks is still the dominant player and leader, and we feel like we can keep chipping away there.
Yeah, because I was going to ask about that. I mean, coffee seems like just an incredibly competitive category, right? And you have Starbucks, but you have all these other businesses that are going, direct to consumer or retail with these cold brew, sub brands. How do you view competition? How do you view differentiation? Is it really just that you guys have? It sounds like you really prioritize getting customer feedback and iterating accordingly, and you've just kind of built this machine that, coffee is just such a large TAM that you're able to like kind of find your lane and you have good unit economics and you're scaling from there? Or what's how do you just navigate an incredibly competitive industry like this?
Yeah, I think, again, looking at our category specifically, and I sometimes people think about coffee as a whole, and they think about cafes, and they kind of get lost in the total coffee world. But our category was, again, pretty archaic and outdated, so we really were going to bet on being the better-for-you player in that better-for-you movement, which, again, was just starting in 2015. So it didn't come into our category, and we thought if we can move quickly here and create a product with 0 sugar and 10 grams of protein and less than 100 calories, we can capitalize on this opportunity. And that's exactly what we did. And we spent, our years from 2016 to 2020 just in hyper growth mode, building out our sales team, marketing team. We raised a ton of capital, which we can talk about. But we built that system, and it made it really hard for any new entrants to come and compete with us. And then anytime Starbucks or Dunkin' or Java Monster tried to create a better-for-you product, the consumer rejected it. And so the consumer started to identify the Super Coffee brand as the better-for-you player in the category. And that's what's really beneficial in consumer packaged goods. Obviously, if you can get an early start and get to scale, you can create some moats around the business and around the brand. Now, what we didn't learn early on, and these are some of the mistakes that we probably made, but we certainly sacrificed a lot of efficiencies. We were very inefficient. We were spending a ton of money to get to scale. Our unit economics weren't very strong. So those were things we had to clean up post-COVID. I wish we did it before our Series C, but we didn't. So we've spent the past 5 years, I like to joke now, our first 5 years were hyper growth mode. Our last 5 years, we're running a real business. So that's where we're spending our time now, is efficient growth, profitable growth, leveraging the brand strength, though, and continuing to create products that people know and love because they're better for you and they can't get them from other brands.
Awesome. What are a couple of the top things that have worked for you?
So similar to Jordan, we're in a super competitive market in the skincare industry. And what we really focused on was creating a product that really solves a legitimate need that people are searching for. So we focus on making products for people who have sensitive skin conditions like eczema and psoriasis in particular. And it's actually a huge market. 50% of people have sensitive skin. It's not frequently talked about. So it's kind of one of those things that there's a lot more people out there than you think who have this problem. And these are people who have been going to the dermatologist a lot of the time for years, spending hundreds of dollars on appointments and dermatologist prescriptions and things like that just really don't work. So what we were able to do was create a product that was actually effective for these customers. And it sounds crazy, but like the number one piece of feedback we get from our customers is like, wow, like your product actually does exactly what you say it's going to do. And it kind of sounds dumb because it's like, of course, that's how that should be. But particularly in the beauty and skincare industry, that's really uncommon. Like most of the time, it's kind of all hype. And if you get something that does like 25% of what you think it's going to do, you're pretty happy with it. So if you get something that really actually like lives up to the hype behind it, you start to create these very passionate customers who get very excited about the fact that the products actually worked for them. So that was how we got started. And then a lot of our initial growth was just just our own customers through word of mouth, spreading the word about the company and sharing with their friends and sharing with other people. And that's, even to this day, like some of the most valuable marketing we have is people who just get excited about our products and want to, you know, make recommendations to their friends.
Yeah, no, there's nothing better than organic growth and, you know, low to no CAC, right? So that's awesome. I want to pivot a little bit into a couple things. So I think both of you were on Shark Tank. You both took a different direction with respect to capital raising. I think you literally just raised $100,000 from Mark Cuban, and that was it.
Yes, that was it.
Right? No more equity financing.
Yes. Thank you.
And then Jordan, I believe you know, also went on Shark Tank, but you then proceeded to raise $150 million, if I have that correctly. So,
A little different.
which is also very impressive. I'm more in your boat. You know, we've raised about 100 at Better. So I guess, Lainey, I'll start with you. Like, what, what was that? First of all, like, I'm just curious, like, what was it like going on Shark Tank? What was the impact to your business? What was it like working with Mark Cuban? And then why did you make the decision to not raise any more equity financing?
Yeah, so first of all, the Shark Tank experience for us was super, super critical to the growth of the business. First of all, when we did Shark Tank, I did the show, I taped for the show like 3 months after I turned 18. So I, at the time, was trying to get a bank loan, but I was an 18-year-old and obviously had no credit or no assets or anything. And up until that point, the business had been financed entirely on credit cards in my mom's name. So we had about 65 grand in credit card debt that we had initially funded the business with, but like at that point, that was kind of tapped. And when we got our Shark Tank investment, it was literally like I was bouncing checks out of the bank account like the week before, and then we got our investment money just in time. And then the Shark Tank effect was really, really awesome for us because, like I said, we are in a position where there's a lot of people out there who are actively trying to solve the problem that we're providing a solution for. So me being able to go on Shark Tank and actually pitch it to all of those people was super effective, especially because we were an e-commerce company, people could buy the products immediately and they were low cost. So it was a really good, just like immediate impulse buy. So we were kind of like a perfect fit for like the Shark Tank format when it came to like capitalizing on just generating sales out of it. And also when we did it, we were season 4, so we were early on in that, but we were also kind of like right at the peak of their viewership. So we got a huge bump from the show. We went from doing like 80K a year the year prior to doing 650K in 3 days following our Shark Tank appearance. So it was really, really crazy, crazy growth for us. And then, you know, in addition to that, working with Mark was really valuable because at that point, we kind of had a little bit of a struggle with legitimacy of the brand because I was young and we're in this super competitive industry. As we were starting to do things like negotiate retail deals and stuff like that, we were really having a lot of problems getting people to take us seriously. So just kind of having that name behind us was really important. From a funding perspective, like I said, it really couldn't have come at a better time because we had to grow so fast following that show that had we not had any money to work with, that would have been really challenging because we had to, you know, finance raw materials and things like that. But then following that, we operated just entirely from reinvesting profits from the company because we became profitable within that first year almost immediately, and that's how we've been running since then. So we did Shark Tank in 2013, thank you, and we've been profitable every year since then to this point, and that's part of why we made the conscious decision not to take additional funding because I was able to reinvest that way.
Yeah, no, that's amazing, and congratulations on accomplishing that.
Thank you.
But have you ever been tempted to just, you know, grab $10 to $25 million and pour gasoline on the fire and just try to build a multi-billion-dollar business?
So this is kind of like opening a can of worms about like a slightly separate discussion, but like I think about that all the time. But I feel very passionately that kind of like applying the venture model just to direct-to-consumer companies doesn't always work, because ultimately you also have to be driving a profit at some point to be able to actually like make that work. And like you can keep investing money and putting it in to grow your top line revenue, but like what happens to these larger brands who like take on a lot of venture money and just scale for the sake of scaling and don't focus on profitability is like at some point there's kind of like a bubble there. So obviously there are successful approaches for direct-to-consumer companies taking venture money. I'm not saying that's not a viable strategy, but it just really wasn't something that I wanted to do with this. Like I just wanted to be able to grow it in a way that maintained our profitability, and that was just kind of the approach that I consciously decided to take. I definitely think about it all the time. Sometimes like, well, I could have done that, and then what would have happened? And like, I think as a founder, you can always look back on those decisions and say, well, maybe then this would have gone a different way, but also maybe it wouldn't have worked at the same time too. So I think you can't second guess those things in retrospect too much.
Yeah, no, that's all fair. I guess a good segue over to Jordan, who you did go down the path of raising a considerable amount of venture money, and maybe similarly talk about the experience on Shark Tank, and then ultimately the motivation around raising the $150 million. Do you regret raising that much capital, or are you still going to be raising money? And just walk through some of the thinking around your fundraising strategy and why you've built the business the way you have.
Yeah, Shark Tank was a phenomenal experience for the business. We were a year old. We were doing about $2 million in revenue, and our business plan had us growing to about $20 million in revenue the next year. We didn't need the capital, but we needed any advantage we could get at that point. So we leveraged Shark Tank to negotiate with retailers, get more space on shelves, tell the story, build awareness, etc. So it was very valuable. We ended up beating plan that year and continuing to raise. Our issue, and I mentioned it earlier, was from an economic standpoint of the business at the time, our contribution margins didn't even come close to covering our OPEX. So we were burning quite a bit of cash, but we were growing 400 to 500% year on year from 2016 to 2020. And when COVID came, thankfully we had a war chest to utilize. So we continued to grow through COVID. We raised our Series C in 2021, which was a $100 million round at about a $535 million valuation. And definitely, multiples and valuations have changed quite a bit. And I would say that I don't regret doing that for the time. Obviously, looking back on that, it's easy to say, obviously, we could have taken a different approach and done things a lot differently. But again, that gave us the war chest we needed to get through the tough times. We basically, I can tell you what happens to you. You go through a lot of pain and suffering when you transition the business from hypergrowth to profitability. So over the past few years, using the capital that we raised in the Series C to get back to profitable growth, there was a year or two where we declined, and now we can refocus using our own cash and our lending partners to grow the business profitably, over the next 5 years. So we've set up, additional rounds. The only, funding we do now is in the form of secondary to take out some past investors who might want to leave the business. But yeah, valuations were sky high in 21. We took advantage of it, obviously, and now we're building back using our own cash.
Got it. Yeah. So that's what I was going to ask, right? Like, have you raised money since that kind of peak market condition? But it sounds like you've gotten the business to a profitable position. You leverage the cash you're able to raise at peak market to enable yourself to do that. And if there is equity raised, it's in the form of secondary right now.
Exactly right. Yep.
Yeah.
So we basically pivoted the entire business, went through the transformation process. So from 22 to 24, we brought, we had experienced management. We brought in some folks from Pepsi and Coke, et cetera, to kind of augment the founding team. Some worked out, some didn't work out. And then ultimately I stepped back into the CEO role last year. And again, our focus now is trying to run a business that's growing 20 to 25% a year and with 8 to 12% EBITDA margins, ultimately to get to an outcome that we feel is best for all of our shareholders.
Got it. Ed, you've raised quite a bit of money at very high valuations. Not saying it wasn't warranted. I'm just to clarify. I'm sure it was. So maybe talk to us a little bit about your reflections on that with Glorified. If I could share what the peak price was, I think it was 800. Would you have done anything differently?
So much. I've done so much differently.
All right, we'll talk about it. What would you do differently?
I mean, like, I look back and I'm like, what was I doing? I remember, I was, this was a few years ago now, so I was like, I know everyone's really young here, but I was like 22, 21, and when you're raising it,
how old are you now?
What?
How old are you now?
25.
Okay.
Yeah.
Old man over here.
I swear, it's different though. I mean, like, the amount that you grow when you go through this sort of stuff. Anyway, I mean, yeah. It's just...
I agree with you, by the way. Like, just thinking about, like, myself from being, 21 to 25, it is a big difference. And then from 25 to, I'm turning 30 in a couple weeks, right?
Man,
like that.
that's
It's just
crazy.
like, it's very, yeah. But I'm like Paul. I mean, Paul, I was wondering earlier, because Paul's like, I'm the oldest Thiel fellow of all time. He's probably like 32 or something. So, but yeah, back to the valuations and the capital raising. Like, what would you?
So when you're that age, when you're 21, 22, and you've got like 100 million in the bank, and you're just kind of sitting there, and you're having dinner with Justin Bieber one day, and then Selena Gomez the next day, and you're just kind of like, you're in this weird world of like, I guess maybe like your co-founder with Vinny to some degree. I just felt like, a really big deal. And and I don't know if I should have done. It was so crazy because when so many people, we have like, today, like 30 million people or whatever on Glorify. It's like, it's a lot of people, and, thank you. But, when you've got all these sort of massive celebrities also kind of using it and acting as if you're like a celebrity too, it's just kind of bad. And then, what's really bad? No, and I love them, God bless SoftBank, okay? But the problem is that you start, especially when you're that age and you haven't done it a lot, you start doing what these people are kind of, saying and pushing on you. And at that time, everyone's like, grow at all costs. It doesn't matter. Don't monetize. Let's just pump the user base. We'll let you sell 10, 20 mil of secondary a year, and you'll be great. And then you'll raise again at triple that valuation, and you still don't need to be doing loads of revenue. Anyway, I'd sit there in my room at my parents' house with, massive VCs that kind of everyone here will know. And they'll be kind of down to write me a timesheet at $1 billion, $1.5 billion, whatever. And I just what was going through my head? Because I'd just be like, unless it's 2, I'm not really interested. And this is when my business should not have been worth more than $75 million, $80 million. It was just really crazy. I can't even remember what the question was, but about would I have done anything differently? Yeah. First thing I would have done differently, hard paywall the crap out of my business. I think, it's strange because my view in the Christian ecosystem I was building was let's build this amazing foundational daily worship app that people come to, which was amazing during COVID because people couldn't go to church, and so they download my app instead. So instead of doing live stream church on Instagram, people would come to Glorify, and that's where everything sat. And my view was, I'd looked at Calm and Headspace, and I'd hired so many people from those companies, and I knew what the best paid conversion rate I could possibly get was. And to me, that wasn't the literal $1 trillion business I now had to build because of the valuations I'd raised at. And so I was like, okay, our retention seems really strong. Let's build adjacent products to the daily worship app where I know we can get a higher paid conversion. For example, Christian dating. Propensity to pay is way higher in Christian dating than it ever is in a hard paywall content app. donation processing, congregation engagements. You know, the list is kind of infinite of what I could build around this central product. You know, but yeah, it's just you maybe don't realize, I didn't at the time, quite how insane your retention has to be if that's what your long-term strategy is. Like, you've got to have, 40+% day 360 type retention, long enough to then build all these other products that you can monetize that base around. We didn't have that. It just wasn't good enough, and I think if we'd paywalled Glorify from the beginning, we would have built a real billion-dollar company now with the downloads we'd have and what we're continuing to get. But that would have been a lot safer. And then we'd have a sustainable business that we could build these other products around and get the same virality around too. Because, all of these massive celebrities across the board in all these different geographies that, sit in the business, they would have pushed every product that we built inside of Glorify. It didn't just have to be that one. And so I think, to me, I look back and I was like this 21, 22-year-old that just didn't really know what he was doing and, was living the dream as well.
Yeah, no, I hear you, man. I've kind of been there. And I think a lot of people in this room it's like a very weird, thing, right? When you're in your very early 20s and a lot of people are still in university, right?
I'm a different person now, guys. Like, profitability.
You're 25 and old and wise, and
thank you.
Yeah. So I want to pivot a little bit to, and I know this was kind of brought up in the first couple talks, but global markets are kind of in turmoil right now about tariffs, and people on this panel are uniquely kind of potentially exposed to it, given you're running consumer businesses. Lainey, I'll start with you. How are you navigating this, and what are the implications for your business?
So we're unique because we do all of our manufacturing here in the U.S. So we have our own facility.
There we go.
Thank you. We have our own facility in Pittsburgh where we make all of our products on site. So we don't have to be in a situation where we're sourcing overseas, but of course we will experience some of the ripple effect just through the supply chain as the tariffs start to drive up costs on other things. And we haven't seen that yet because it'll probably be a longer term effect for us. The other thing too is, this was something we experienced during COVID as well, was there's certain materials that we are currently sourcing successfully from within the US, but as other companies can't source from overseas and that supply chain starts to get more strained and there starts to be scarcity with that, it starts getting more difficult for us to be able to reliably source certain materials. From that perspective, I feel like we're fairly insulated from it because we already navigated it in 2021 as a result of COVID. So having been through that, I see as a benefit because we already had to figure out how to navigate that situation one time. So now it's going to be kind of about applying a similar type of situation going forward. So thankfully, we're a little bit insulated from it.
You're insulated, and it's almost like a competitive advantage for you.
Yeah,
at
exactly.
this point. And what was the decision to initially start in the U.S.?
Yeah, so initially we kind of started out of necessity because we were literally a tiny company and we were manufacturing all of the products by hand ourselves. And then we had to scale so quickly after we did Shark Tank that we didn't really have a chance to think even about the possibility of going out and negotiating a manufacturing contract because we had to grow literally overnight. So it was kind of all right, we just have to do this the same way we're doing this and hire more people and figure out how to scale it up that way. So once we did that, it actually became a really important competitive advantage for us because we can turn over our inventory super, super fast. So essentially for us, everything is made small batch, and if we sell out of a product because we don't accurately project how much we're going to need, we can replenish it within an hour of it selling out. That's how quick our manufacturing is. So because of that, we have a lot of agility, and we have to sit on very little inventory, we don't have to tie up a lot of cash in inventory because we don't have to sit on it because we can make it exactly as we need it. And that's why we've continued to manufacture our products the way we do, because we kind of figured out it actually gave us a competitive advantage over time.
Yeah, that's awesome. Jordan. What's your perspective on what's going on?
Yeah, it's obviously very dynamic. It's been evolving quite a bit. I think since the new administration came in, they were pretty clear about, at least a high-level intention. And for us, we tried to maintain flexibility on the supply chain side with our manufacturing partners. We obviously have several. We obviously import a lot of raw materials as well. And we use our portfolio to our advantage. Obviously, some products have higher margins than other products within the portfolio, so we can be a little bit crafty about how we plan moving forward. But ultimately, we view tariffs as, input cost to some extent. Obviously, you can negotiate with your suppliers and your raw material providers to share some of that increased cost with you as well. And that's what we try to do. And we try to take a long-term approach as well to it. So not just thinking immediately. Obviously, the policy has shifted a bit, and hopefully there's some changes in the future as well. But again, I think taking the long-term view, understanding where we need to be from a margin perspective and a profitability perspective, playing with the tools and levers that we have, making the best long-term decisions is what we're trying to focus on, and really focused on our business and our customers and our consumers in terms of different price points and thresholds, and where you can have some elasticity versus where you might run into some trouble, and using some of the data points that we've seen our competitors make mistakes on over the years, as inflation obviously has been so prominent in most markets, but especially within coffee. So taking those data points and just learning that, look, we might have a little bit of room. We've always been very competitive on price. So if we do have to take price to protect ourselves and maintain margins, we may be able to do that on some products or in some markets and some channels, but maybe not on all channels, because we are also seeing consumers shift to bulk purchasing. So we might be taking price, at places like Whole Foods, where the consumer might have a little bit more elasticity. But we also might be getting more competitive at a place like Costco or Walmart, where there's more value shopping going on. So trying to be dynamic, trying to be as patient, though, as possible, too, to see how things continue to evolve. But ultimately, again, if you are facing tariffs, you should view it in a sense, obviously partner with your supply chain partners, but as an input cost to your business, and it could be a threat to the business as well.
Yep, super well said. Ed, as you're thinking about, starting this new business, has anything that's transpired over the last few days potentially influenced how you're going to go about pursuing that?
I mean, I moved to Brazil for, lots of reasons. But don't know where to start. But for me, consumer software is the ultimate way to change behavior if you can build it right. I've had type 1 diabetes since I was 11, 12, been wearing a CGM since then, basically, and I built an app probably a year and a half ago now that turns your CGM data into a game, so everything you eat affects the experience. It was sort of a social experiment that I built for fun originally, so every day I'd introduce you to someone else with type 1 diabetes with a CGM on, and you'd compete to see who can maintain the best blood glucose levels in the day. And if I drink a Coca-Cola, I go out of the range and suddenly I'm losing against this guy in the US or Brazil or wherever the person is. And, because diabetes is quite a macro condition, sorry to kind of devolve into this, but you don't realize it's gone badly till 20 years down the line and you're getting complications. And so I just wanted to think of something that would make people want to try for more than just their long-term health reasons. It's so funny that that's like a real issue. But anyway, we're now sort of in the process of merging with a CGM device itself. The problem is the space is very kind of it's really a duopoly between Abbott and Dexcom. So unless you're them, you can't really compete. Anyway, the guy who invented the Dexcom G4 device left Dexcom to start a competing CGM business, raised a ton of money, got all the patents, and now they're kind of commercializing this year. And so the dream was I come on, run the software side, turn it into a full-blown platform rather than just a device company that just cares about selling as many devices as possible. Can we build something better that actually gets people to take care of themselves? And anyway, all I know, because this definitely isn't my side of the brain and way of thinking, but I think they've got a factory here in San Diego, and I think that's going to actually, tariffs end up being a good thing for them. And then we've got a whole other side of the business in China. So I think, yeah, if you can set yourself up well like that, protect yourself. I don't know.
Cool. I guess one last question, and then I don't know, maybe we'll have time for no time for Q&A. Okay, well, never mind. But I wanted to ask you guys. We're at the Thiel Fellowship reunion. How was the experience being a Thiel Fellow? And maybe mention what class you were in, and just what the experience was like with the program, with the community, obviously the grant. You know, I remember Jack Abraham calling me in 2015, telling me about this $100,000, and my first question was, how much equity? And he was explaining to me that, it was a grant and there was not an equity contribution, and, it was a life-changing experience for me. So would be curious to hear from you all. Maybe Ed, we'll start with you. What was the experience like?
I think I was in 2022. And for me, this has been like the coolest thing ever. Like, I've been building technology companies since I was like 10 years old. Never met anyone like me. Always thought I was super different. And this is the one place that I go back to my wife, like the hotel yesterday. I'm just like, man, I wish I was around everyone more often. Like, the energy and the excitement and the, I don't know, almost connectedness that I feel in this community is just really, it's really special, and I've never had it anywhere else. So, I just wish we do things more like this, more often. So, long live Zaid and Joey and Nick for all of this.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, it was amazing. Very similar, I think, life-changing experience, as a 18-year-old, getting the opportunity. I was, again, a scholarship athlete at the time, so giving up a full scholarship to take the fellowship was a huge risk and step for me, but I wouldn't have done it without that. So best decision I've ever made, I think. And being an entrepreneur and a CEO is hard, especially when you're 19 years old doing it for the first time. And having the community, I always looked forward to, and again, I agree we need to do it more often, but always looked forward to getting together. Always had something to think about, and again, when we are all together, it's nice to be around people going through the same challenges, same struggles, even if it's different industry, it doesn't really matter. So I think it's been super unique and super fun, and again, it's been, almost 10 years for me, and it's crazy. It feels like it was last year that I entered the fellowship. But one of the coolest things I've been a part of for sure, and also makes my journey a lot more unique than a lot of other food and beverage entrepreneurs. Obviously, we share that together, but it's not that prominent in food and beverage, which has made it even more unique. And so grateful for the 10-year journey that we've been on here.
Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I would say for me, I am from Pittsburgh. I still live in Pittsburgh. There's not really a big, startup community going on there. So, I got into the fellowship when I was kind of old. I was 22 when I was accepted in. So I was already, way beyond deciding to drop out of school. I barely finished high school. I was way down that journey already. But the thing for me was I think it was just very validating to get to be around a lot of other people who were successful and making unconventional decisions with their life path, because I think you can get very used to being the weird one where everybody's why you do I had so many people even after we did Shark Tank and had reached a certain level of success. I would see people all the time, and the first question they would ask me is when are you going to college?
Same.
And I would be why are you asking me that? That is so not the point of any of this. And people would act starting this company was something I was doing to be able to put it on my resume to get into school. And I was no, that is the complete opposite of why I'm trying to do this. And once you're used to being in that environment, it's really cool to get a chance to be around other people who just get it, because you either get it or you don't, and it's really hard to convince somebody who doesn't get it, why you should be doing this.
Yep. Great. Well, I think that's a great place to end this panel. Really appreciate you guys, and thank you all.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate you. All right. Round of applause for these guys. Amazing. Well, up next, Mr. Nick.
I'm glad to have everyone together. It's as everyone's been saying, it's it's so good to have so many cohorts of different fellows all together in one place, and we should definitely do it more. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to the rest of today. And I figured for today's panel here, it would be remiss of us to not talk about AI, considering the news cycles. So we're pretty lucky to have a pretty good sampling of kind of the whole stack of AI here. We've got everything from kind of the underlying chip layer to the cloud environment to LLMs and all the way through to application layer stuff here as well. So I thought we'd start with maybe Robert. You've decided to build a company focused on taking on pretty much the biggest kid in town. You're taking on NVIDIA. Why did you decide to start there? Of all the things you could have worked on in life, why did you choose to build this company?
Yeah, absolutely. For context, I guess, we started back in 2022, right after OpenAI did a bunch of public research on GPT-3, basically with the simple insight that these models are going to get really big and really expensive. And if you think about if you're going to spend tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars on AI models, it's just became, at least in our eyes, obvious that you would have to reinvent the entire data center. So, not just, the racks and the interconnects and the power and the cooling, but all the way down to the chips themselves. So we were looking at this and looked at the roadmap of all the different products coming out, and we just realized that the hardware was just not going to get better fast enough. And we saw an opportunity by specializing to get, quite literally an order of magnitude cost, power, performance improvement over NVIDIA GPUs coming out this year. So when you see that, you run.
I guess the news cycle this week is, or over the last few weeks, has been, Sam Altman talking about how his GPUs are not functioning anymore. I guess that's been a pretty big tailwind for you guys as you think about your business.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just spent the past week traveling in Asia, actually because of this, where in India in specific last week, ChatGPT became over twice as popular than Google, which is staggering, and I think in history will be a big moment in time where this actually starts to become a mass market product. India in specific has a very interesting problem where they have over 1 billion users, but the cost per user, in terms of like the ability of willingness to pay, could be over a tenth of what it is in the U.S. So you're spending the same amount of money for an H100, but you're trying to serve it to way more people that just can't afford it. So for us, that's a huge opportunity. Even a lot of these governments are subsidizing the compute. It's nowhere close to what's required to get to the cost per token people require. And yeah, it just shows that like the GPUs are melting. They need help, so we're happy to serve.
That's awesome. And so Jamie, I guess I'm gonna go kind of think about the whole AI stack, and so I'm gonna go in that order. So Jamie, you've had quite the ride the last few years, from the last kind of Thiel Fellowship reunion weekend to now. Would love to kind of hear a little bit about that journey. It's been quite incredible.
So there's basically, we're like Airbnb for GPUs, and we figured that actually one of the most important things for AI companies is not so much cost, it's speed. So the ability to get cloud services really quickly. So we ended up building a cloud service similar to something you'd use with AWS or whatever, but specifically for building GPU clusters incredibly fast. So we manage all the different parts of building out these GPU clusters. We do the racking and stacking. We actually now help with the data center build-outs. And we have a software layer on top that essentially enables you to really, really quickly build out massive clusters. Now, so that's the Hollywood sell. The truth is, it's been like an unbelievably sort of pivoty, crazy mess. In the first like 3 years, and then 3-4 years, then it really made sense, and we went. So we did a lot of pivoting and sort of finding our feet. And initially, we were actually building. We're actually building it on individual computers, so like individual consumer computers, and trying to do a sort of Airbnb there. So so 2 years ago, I think, when we did this offsite, we had like just over 2 mil ARR, and I think since then we've scaled to 180 mil. So it's been like ridiculous sort of like.
And I'd love to double click a little bit about the journey. I know you mentioned it kind of, there were some twists and turns along the way. Somewhere along the journey, I think you were building an eco neobank. So I would love to understand kind of how you how you weave through that.
Yeah, well, so essentially, there's sort of like what I call the hell period, which I'm sure all of you have had, which is like the period where you haven't quite figured out PMF, you don't fully know what the business is, and our hell period was very, very long. And we really were desperately trying to find contracts and customers for like, a couple of years at the beginning, and there was like, the real peak of hell was we'd close this amazing deal. It was like 600K ARR. It was like one of the biggest deals we were going to close. And we got the DocuSign. It was all done. And we found out like 2 weeks later, it was just some like basically back office guy who's pretending to be the CEO that wanted to mine crypto on our things and not pay. So it was like total disaster. I was like, after like 3 years of like trying to figure out, we were like, okay, do you know what? Actually, fuck this. This is like, we're going to let this live. We're going to let it sort of do a cash cow thing, and we're going to put the intern in charge. And we gave the intern a good bit of equity, and we're like, just keep it alive. There's something here, and we're going to go build another business. And so the intern did his did his like internship, and during that period, scaling laws kicked in basically, and the entire market for building GPU clusters totally changed, and we had to go back. Well, I actually stayed building the new business, but my co-founder went back, and we had to buy the intern out. So I think we. I think we have the record for the highest paid intern ever. So his internship paid him $5 million. So it's like pretty good deal. Yeah.
You got good secondary.
Who actually who's the customer for the cluster?
Yeah. So the one that scammed us, or the
no. You do 180 million, right? Who buys that?
So it's primarily AI labs, so like large language model labs who are sort of needing to build really large training clusters. We do inference as well now, but it started as primarily training. Now we do both, but it's many labs. Yeah.
Good thing you have a representative from an AI lab sitting right next to you. Maybe there's some business to be done there. Alex, I'd love to chat a little bit about your journey. So you were obviously actually pretty early to kind of application layer AI with autonomous trucking with your last company. Incredible ride as well. Would love to hear a little bit about the journey. I think it mirrors Ed's journey a little bit from Glorify. So I'd love to give the audience a little bit of the background there.
Okay, cool. So I feel like a lot of us had the experience of having really high valuations in 2021 and then like having to deal with that later. So my version of this experience is I did a self-driving truck company Embark. We did a SPAC in 2021 and went public at $5 billion, and then we rode it from $5 billion down to 70 million, and then we sold it at 70 million a year and a half ago. So that was, that's the extremely short version. There was a lot of stuff that happened in between, but it was definitely an interesting experience.
Yeah, $600 million of capital in between, right?
Right.
So, in all seriousness, so do you think kind of market environment, market timing, was it you were too early for what you were building? Do you think it was a market environment thing? You were pretty early with some pretty cutting edge technology, which was I think pretty valuable. Do you think you were a little early?
I think that self-driving is just a really, really, really hard problem. Like you can look at all the businesses that have working systems, of which there's really only Waymo, and like they've all spent tens of billions. So I think one way of looking at it is like we didn't deliver the thing. Another way of looking at it is we started off as 2 undergrads, dropped out, competed against Google, raised $500 million, and got a lot further than you would expect for 2 dropouts. And admittedly, I'll say only $500 million. But what was needed was like 4 or 5. And so like I think it wasn't timing so much as like you really needed to be one of like 2 or 3 people that someone gave $3 or $4 billion. You took a lot of risk to get there, and like sometimes you kind of don't get the next step.
That makes sense. And you're now working at Anthropic. What was the decision to kind of not build again and go and work at obviously an incredibly exciting company and in a very interesting role? You're doing alignment, as I understand it. And so yeah, we'd love to understand the kind of decisioning there.
So Embark was built in large part on me having spent like almost a decade doing robotics before. And so I felt like being a technical expert was a really important part of allowing me to do a hard tech company. But having been the CEO for 8 years, my technical skills were atrocious by the end. And so I thought, I don't want to do like some lame wrapper company. I want to do a frontier technology company again. But to do that, I need to have real skills. And so I'm like, how am I going to go back and like get real skills? And I managed to convince Anthropic to hire me to work with a bunch of PhDs to do AI safety research. And so it's super exciting, and I learned an incredible amount doing it.
In a sec, I'll come back because I'd love to kind of double click a little bit on AI safety and kind of where we're going and the kind of the least generic responses we can get there. But Spencer, I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of application layer stuff. So obviously you've had a relatively long journey, I think 10 or so years, 12
Yeah, 12 years, yeah.
12 years. So kind of where did the business start to kind of transform using AI? What were the kind of big unlocks? What's enabled you to be a more efficient company because of that?
Yeah, so just quick background. I run a company called Radar, so we make hardware and software platform for retail stores. So it's autonomous retail space. Basically, sensors that go on the ceiling. They locate every item and every person in 3D. And then you can use that data for a variety of applications. For us, it was, a 12-year journey. The challenge, I think, in our space was to sell to enterprise, because only enterprise customer, like we weren't able to go sell to SMBs, like tiny boutiques or anything like that. We really were targeting the biggest retailers. So as a result, you need to have this massive vertically integrated product before you can even sell to one customer. So you have to build, all these different layers of the stack, including, the signal processing, the hardware, et cetera. So really about 18 months ago is when, we were able to prove out ROI with that full vertically integrated stack and, start generating significant revenues.
I've also noticed kind of along the way, I think we were speaking yesterday a little bit about this. You've chosen to take capital in a slightly different way to other people. You've gone with kind of more private capital versus venture capital. We'd love to just like side tangent away from AI for a second. Kind of what was thinking there? Has that been a good experience for you? How have you enjoyed that?
Yeah, sure. So I think, we basically just raised money from probably anyone that was willing to give it to us. So we raised about $120 million in total. So far, we're closing a larger round now, but about the same size. And basically, I think for us it was this hard tech problem where you have to build hardware from the ground up. You're in a space like retail. No one was really bullish on retail for a long period of time because e-commerce was continuing to grow, especially during the pandemic. You saw this like complete reversal against physical retail, and then you saw it start to reverse a little bit. So we really had to find capital from kind of unusual sources, mostly family offices in the retail space that had built retail brands, in order to fund this development along the way. So for us, like now we have revenues and everything's on a great growth trajectory. We can go back into the traditional market, but that was why.
It's helpful that AI is a hot commodity right now.
Yeah,
so
no, absolutely.
It's useful. Jamie, I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about valuable applications you're seeing. You see a lot of usage, as I understand it, from kind of the AI cloud kind of environment. There, what's the are there any interesting things you're seeing happening right now? Any patterns? Any things that are getting a lot of usage that are maybe less obvious?
Yeah, one of the cool things about being cloud is we can see spend in real time on the services. So we can see which inference services are really accelerating for which companies. We can actually see which ones are doing really well. I won't name specific names, but some stuff that you maybe won't have heard of as much is cybersecurity. So seeing a lot of really interesting uptick in cybersecurity companies that are using LLMs and the sort of proto agents to do some really smart things. In particular in the browser, so you could just automatically look at the script on the site and see, okay, there's some sketchy things going on there. Okay, I can go through the email and see actually that's obviously a phishing email address, but the user might not realize it. I'm going to flag it. Things like that. Seeing a lot of interesting uptake on those. Also teaching, weirdly, so sometimes ed tech gets a bit of a hard rep, but I think, in this case, AI will be actually a really big deal for ed tech. So we're seeing a lot of those companies, especially in areas where countries where education is like maybe a little harder for people to afford or whatever. We're seeing like really big uptake on sort of LLM type tutors. So those are two of the more unusual kind of areas. Obviously, coding is the massive one that takes most of the inference, but those are sort of two little like changes in the water that we've seen that I think could really grow. Yeah.
Interesting. Alex, in your seat at Anthropic, you're obviously seeing a lot of interesting things happening kind of on the inside. How are you thinking about mission alignment, AI safety? What are the things that are less obvious than just bad actors or people getting automated out of jobs? Like what are things that you're thinking seriously about and researching into right now? It's a pretty interesting vantage point.
So I think if we were to work through like the things that are the most scary about coming AGI, I would sort of work, maybe the like most common one that people talk about is like threat vectors around terrorism. So like, can people use it to create bioweapons or cyber weapons? And does it fundamentally alter the balance of power between offense and defense? I think that's probably third. And then if I was to go like, what are the things that I struggle or like am worried about? I think then if you sort of work your way up, the one that's most scary is governance. And so you, as an AI lab, you can't do so much about governance. But I think the fundamental nature of society is built on the fact that society is mostly labor. And so if you change society so that it's not mostly human labor, then all of the fundamental assumptions of like the fact that we have democracy and capitalism sits on top of the fact that we need a well-educated, highly incentivized, useful populace. And so I think that's super dangerous and hard to solve in AI lab. And then in between, number two would be misalignment. So we think a lot about, is the AI going to do what we want it to? And, hopefully. And so you kind of work your way up the stack, right? Like people misusing it misusing itself, and then the nature of society changing in a meaningful way.
Robert, I had a kind of question on, so, obviously the LLM layer is obviously extremely competitive, a lot of money going there. Generally less people, with venture capital dollars have focused on the kind of the underlying layer, more of the hardware stack there. You've obviously chosen to focus there. Kind of, how do you see the landscape? What are the really, really big challenges for you? Obviously, we know what the big challenges are for like the Nvidias of the world because we can see it happening right now. But when you're a few-year-old company, what are the really, really, really hard problems to solve?
Yeah, for us, I think it's getting to scale. It's a supply chain game. I think you can kind of look in a very like macro sense of how AI models are going to change just by looking at the constraints of hardware. So, like things that bottleneck parameter count scaling is going to be memory bandwidth, and you look at, okay, who are the major memory providers and when are they going to roll out their next gen products, and what is going to be the yield curve and the cost curve, and then can this stuff ever actually get onto the edge? And you kind of go through this sequence of hundreds of different kind of parameters, and you find a constraint space that basically says, you don't really want to innovate in atoms, you want to innovate in bits. And just take an architecture bet on existing technology. I think the things that we're thinking about in terms of how to get to scale is, basically, can we actually build production lines quickly enough and scale them quickly enough to do, full rack level integration and cluster level integration in data centers? I think the thing that's really interesting is that generally the people who will bet on new hardware will only bet if they see a path to spending billions a year within 18 months of their first deployment. So it's exciting, but also a tall order.
Yeah. And from a financing perspective, obviously it's pretty expensive to build out a lot of the infrastructure you're talking about here. Can you shift that onto your clients at all? How does that work? I mean, how much do you have to subsidize this go-to-market?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the interesting thing about GPU spend in general is it's really a game of credit. So, we're just seeing all sorts of interesting things from different players in alternative credit in Wall Street. Of course, CoreWeave pioneered a lot of the asset-backed loans in GPUs, and of course, there's maybe a natural question on depreciation curves for GPUs, but a lot of people who were pricing 5, 6, 7, 8 year straight line depreciation, I'm not so sure if they'll get the straight line. Maybe they'll get the 5 years, but I think for us, it's a very interesting problem because as new hardware, you don't necessarily know what's the collateral value. So it's very hard to decide how do you finance it, and then how do you kind of create different levers in the supply chain, because some components may be commoditized, some aren't. Like if you're selling a server, maybe you can sell off the CPU components because they're Xeons or something, and so forth. So it's something we've spent a lot of time on, and we've found some pretty creative solutions.
That's awesome. And I guess an extension of that is really where the value accrues in AI. I think that's like a really interesting kind of topic of conversation. Obviously, there's a pretty full stack there. The cloud providers, obviously, in your traditional internet era, accrued a lot of value. You had a lot of value accruing at the application layer as well. You've obviously got this LLM race right now where everyone's kind of trying to compete and release new models. I would love to hear from everyone of where everyone thinks the value accrues here ultimately in AI.
Should I start? Yeah, I think it's definitely an open question. I think the rappers had a lot of bad press at the beginning. Actually, I think the customer-facing rappers may end up being some of the better businesses. In fact, because customers are ultimately going to remain humans, which means they're going to sort of like the brand they know and be lazy and want to keep just updating the current software they use. So actually, I think long live the rappers in some ways. But I think ultimately, the real value here is actually is primarily going to be in the chip, the chips and the
there we go.
yeah. Chips and actually energy, in fact. So people who fix the energy problem are going to do super well. So I think, for example, I think France is in the best geopolitical position that it's been in since the 1700s because it's got an overbuild of about 25 gigawatts of energy, which nobody else in Europe has, and they're going to be using a very large amount of that for AI. And I think. I think that's going to be the primary bottleneck, actually, pretty soon. So yeah, I think a lot of value will accrue to people who figure out that problem.
So I think it's interesting to think about this from the perspective of historical analogy. So if you go back to the internet, right? Internet was very similar. There was this idea that it's going to be huge, but it wasn't clear where the value would accrue. And initially, everyone bid up the telecoms, right? The infrastructure providers. And then the dot-com crash happened, and obviously the telcos lost a lot of value. I think if you look at that, you can say the telcos were in fact pretty valuable, right? And then over time, it moved to applications, Google, Facebook, right? And then they were the ones that were powerful. And I think what you see is that generally in an industry, the highest valuations exist for the companies that are moving into new territory. And so as territory kind of gets mature, then people can build on top of it, and then those people get, it moves forward over time. And so right now, you see the model companies are kind of like at the edge in terms of maybe even NVIDIA is at the edge, and then like the model companies are a little bit ahead of that. I think what you'll see is chips go down, model companies come up over time, and then model companies go down, applications come up just as they mature, right? I don't think anyone really has a strong moat to ultimately like hold on to things in the terminal state, except maybe individual applications.
Yeah, just to build off that, I think it's easy to say the hardware will capture the value just because that's what's happening today. And I think the hardware there'll be multiple trillion-dollar companies from hardware, but I think the market will be so big that there will be tens or hundreds of trillion-dollar companies in the application layer. So it's just relative, and you'll often find that the model providers there'll have to be vertical integration, and it's a longer conversation. I think for us, we've seen a lot of value start with people that are already at scale. So to give you an example, one of the largest social media products, billions of users, is moving their entire ads algorithm and soon ads content creation machine from DLRMs to transformers. And the reason they're doing it, despite the costs, and it's going to be a many billion-dollar infrastructure build-out, is they've seen in double-digit and sometimes triple-digit percentage improvements in conversion rate just by doing that. So when you think about if you have an ad network that's bringing in tens of billions of dollars of revenue, that's very material. Yeah. But I think we'll see entirely new modes of work come out in the next few years, just as the models get better, and I think there'll be applications that capture that.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting question. One of the things that I'm kind of thinking about, or have just noticed, and I'm not an expert in LLMs, but just seeing like how rapidly LLMs are able to compete with each other and respond, and how the moats seem to be getting thinner and thinner over time. And then if I contrast that with like, I guess maybe the robotic space or like autonomous driving space, I actually kind of think that there is more of a moat in those areas because, like, if you have a bunch of robots deployed in the world doing a variety of different tasks, then the feedback from doing those tasks in person is like critical data that is now only available to the hardware provider, assuming that they're vertically integrated. So they have this like massive data advantage now vis-a-vis like an LLM, where a lot of people are just using other people's LLMs to accelerate their own. So I do think it will differ along maybe like the physical world interaction level, and then other things may potentially commoditize more rapidly.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if it's kind of the return of hardware investing in a more fashionable sense. I mean, obviously for the last 10, 15 years, it's been software only, software only, software only. I think it's interesting to see kind of with robotics, with obviously hardware infrastructure, it's interesting to see that kind of suddenly become interesting again. And I think that's partly because margins with the hardware software combo actually can be at similar levels. I mean, you can build it. You can maybe not on the infrastructure side, but I mean, you can hardware software combos can get to pretty incredible margins depending on how you build your business model.
Yeah, I mean, two reactions to that. One is, the margins of software businesses have become much less attractive because of AI. So actually, I think hardware companies have more attractive margins right now. I think it really comes down to venture math, where if you have these giant funds, there's just not that many places you can put $1 billion. Yep. So, I think that's why there's been so much interest in this space because, there's not that many opportunities that can scale past $100 billion valuation. And then if you're looking at an entire category of like data center build-outs, for example, it's just like incredibly attractive. And depending on the hardware profile, the collateral you're investing in can actually be quite valuable anyway. So the risk profile is like risk adjusted actually ends up being quite good.
I'm going to disagree here just for, vibes. I tried to run a hardware company, right? I ran a self-driving truck company. And I think it's not about margins, it's about the cost of growth. So, like, sure, you can have decent margins in hardware, yes. But if you want to get to $1 billion, you need to build ahead, right? You need to do manufacturing ahead. You need to buy units ahead. And so if you're trying to do 50% a year growth or 100% a year growth, all your costs are occurring like further up that curve. And so you end up in a situation where if you want $10 billion of self-driving trucks, you need to spend the $10 billion before you have any revenue, right? And so I think that's the difference between hardware and software. Software just, you can scale it up 100 times and it costs you very little.
I completely agree with that conceptually, but I guess the counter to that would be that's assuming that hardware cost and the upfront payments sit on your balance sheet as opposed to being put onto your customer. I think that's been the friction in the past. People don't like hardware companies because the scalability is somewhat limited by your ability to convince your customer to take the balance sheet risk rather than you taking the balance sheet risk. But I guess that's starting to change. I guess in the example, Robert, you gave with very, very big companies changing meaningful amounts of infrastructure on the hardware side there.
Yeah, well, I think self-driving is a particularly pernicious problem, so I feel really bad for you. I think that I would say compute is better and data center is probably best. Compute is better because usually you can get the customer deposits to cover initial outlays, and then now you can a lot of these take-or-pay contracts you can sell to other people, and there's all sorts of ways to do creative financial engineering. But on the data center side, it's so much just land and electricity. And that is going to be very valuable in many ways you spin it. So the amount of investment we've seen there, I think, is pretty staggering. But I'm curious your perspective.
Yeah, you're right. And one of the craziest examples is turbines. So there's not enough turbines being produced for natural gas energy generation, and it's such a bad situation that. It's like a 3-year wait time to get turbines if you order now, and there's in fact not enough casting and forging capacity to even make the turbines that we'll need in a relatively bearish AI sort of scenario. So you're seeing sort of like a ton of things like lenders are incredibly keen to support you buying a bunch of these things up, putting them in immediately, and ordering early, and because they're going to be valuable. Those assets are going to be valuable. Even if there's a sort of ends up being bubbly and people don't need the data center for AI or whatever, the energy infrastructure pieces you bought will still be super valuable. So that definitely helps. But one thing at Fluidstack that we found is that actually combining a really software-heavy approach has worked very well. So CoreWeave is an incredibly just sort of like focused on CapEx and buys out GPUs. We have a slight hybrid approach where we do have a bunch of partner data centers who use our cloud software. So as a customer, you'll have the same experience whether you're using our own infrastructure or whether you're using a partner data center. And that means we can scale much faster. So if a partner data center already has a bunch of GPUs there, we can put a customer on it immediately. They can use it for 6 months while we do a build out. And it also de-risks a little bit for lenders because you have customers already paying. So we do find combining the two works quite well.
I guess my last question, because I know we're running a little bit behind schedule here, it's just the rate limiting factor for AI. Do we think that's going to be safety concerns, regulation, kind of on that side of things, or do we think it's going to be the infrastructure and keeping up here? Because I can see the argument for both, or maybe it's both.
Yeah, I think in the near term, it's going to be infrastructure and energy. And I think when things start getting really freaky and weird, then I think that's when strange governance things will start to be the main. But right now, I don't see a coordinated effort from governments or regulators or anything to significantly stifle the stuff that's going on. I think it's going to primarily be energy, chips, and the sort of the stuff you generally read about. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Mark Zuckerberg said once that the time to build the buildings is the most annoying part. And to share a funny story, one of the largest labs had a data center build out blocked for close to 2 quarters because they had to get a bunch of permitting and coding done. In specific, it was a particular hot button issue where the men and female bathrooms would be placed and whether there'd be any third-party bathrooms. And actually, as a result of this AI lab ended up working with the GPU cloud. So people find ways to move quickly, but I think that building the buildings and getting the power and being able to actually do this stuff at scale and then dealing with all the reliability issues every kind of zero you add to your cluster is going to be the bottleneck.
That makes sense. Awesome.
Yeah, I agree. Compute.
No, go on.
No. I think it's going to be compute, like just physically getting more installed capacity. And then I do think though that like the idea that there's a bottleneck is maybe not true, right? Like I'm definitely of the view that things are expected to get pretty weird pretty soon.
Yeah.
Straight from a lab itself. Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Amazing. Round of applause for these guys. Man, a lot of shit going on here. Thanks, Alex. You particularly. All right. Well, don't leave, because up next is Nick and Ken Fox.
So Ken, thanks so much for coming by, and really appreciate you supporting the community. I think there's a lot of interesting things we can go through that will be incredible advice for some of the people here. So I wanted to start with, so you started your first company very young. In fact, if the Thiel Fellowship had been around, you pretty much would have qualified for that. So that was a kind of a dot-com era company. I would love to start with just the journey there, right? So you started, I think, 1995, was it?
1994.
1994.
Yeah, no, I feel like that first panel was like, it made me feel right at home because I was kind of coming down here expecting for everybody to talking about moonshots and, immediate success. And I was going to feel like a fish out of water, but I really appreciate you guys even more. And to be honest with you, like I'm an investor in the fund, which is how I met Nick and Zaid and this crew. And it gives me a lot more conviction to be an investor with you guys in theory and the next generation of Thiel Fellows, knowing that you guys have that kind of burn the boat mentality and you figure things out and you're navigating, because that was my experience at least. So I also think you guys, I think the world's changed a lot. So when I started that business in 1994, I'd already started 3 businesses, and I had worked at Goldman Sachs. I was in the analyst program. I was there for like 9 months to a year at a time when no one left Goldman and left the analyst program. But I kind of looked around, and I was like, I don't want to be my boss's 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 boss. And I go into Penn State, and what was great for me is it kind of gave me some validation. I was like, okay, like I can keep up intellectually with everybody here. And then I went and worked for a venture firm for about 9 months and became super interested in the internet. and I went to the first internet conference down in Washington, D.C. It was a Meckler Media, it was called. And a guy named Jim Clark, who probably you guys don't even know who he is, but he was an unbelievable entrepreneur. He started Silicon Graphics. And he had a kid from the University of Illinois up there who had written the first browser built on a GUI, right, on HTML, which was Mark Andreessen. Andreessen was a sophomore, maybe a junior in college, and Jim Clark was saying he was going to pull him out of school and launch this and take this Mosaic browser. And I thought, wow, that's probably similar to a lot of your guys' experiences, or certainly this current Thiel class experience when they think about AI and how profound it is. And obviously every wave gets bigger. So I started an internet company called Internet Capital Group with a guy who was about 10 years older than me at the time. I was 22, he was 32. And we started this business in 94. We took the business public in August of 99. By March of 2000, it was public and worth $55 billion. And that was a time when you didn't have 20-year-olds kind of running businesses. In fact, the standard protocol in the Valley was replace the entrepreneur, bring in the hired exec. And that's really well documented, obviously, in a lot of different places. Apple being the most high profile probably with Steve Jobs getting replaced. And so it was it was interesting because I listened to you guys and the experiences, and I was talking to a friend of mine here, Ken Hirsch, and he was saying, it's like a cheat code. Like you guys are cheating, like meaning all of you guys are cheating, and you don't realize you're cheating, but you start a business when you're 17, 18, 19, 20, and you get to live through all these mistakes when the stakes really aren't that high for you, meaning, you're not that far into your career, you don't have a family, you're not married, you don't have a spouse, you don't have any of these things, right? Like what you basically are foregoing is you might be partying less than somebody else your age or doing some bullshit job anyway, right? And what you're learning is all these things all these mistakes. And so that's what I went through. So I by March of 2000, the company that I started, Internet Capital, was worth $55 billion. By January of 2001, it was worth $2 billion. And there was not really a path out because we were just flat out early. And what you guys also are experiencing really early and young is how driven by FOMO the investment community is around emerging technologies. And that's true in the private markets, and it's true in the public markets too, to a certain degree. And so you end up having, these huge speculative periods. Now, those speculative periods end up producing incredible outcomes, but there's a lot of waste along the way, right? There's a lot of inefficiency to the investing, a lot of inefficiency around the entrepreneurship, and so kind of managing your way through that is obviously part of the game.
No doubt. And see, Alex, there you are. So you're not the only person who round-tripped in the public market. So
yeah.
No, it's
it's been
it's been happening for decades. So no, it's very interesting. Kind of when we think about the AI market right now and the 2021 kind of bubble as well. Obviously, this isn't the first time we've had crazy inflated valuations. It's not the first time we've had a lot of companies that look quite similar to other companies being built over and over again. I guess thinking back to kind of that time, how has that experience back in .com and that whole era kind of informed how you think about investing now? You've obviously moved on to the investing side of the table now.
Yeah, I think the .com was really extreme because you had kind of an idea of how you could apply this technology, but none of the infrastructure was in place, meaning bandwidth wasn't there on the internet side. The costs were out of whack, the infrastructure, the adoption, and obviously all of that has changed, right? Initially with the internet and then with mobile, and now you've got, everybody in the world has access to it. And so that infrastructure is different, and that infrastructure around AI is obviously different too. So I do think that, you are seeing really rapid adoption of these applications. I think it is a little bit more like 2021 in software and application software than even the .com, which is kind of ironic since it's much more recent. But I think the way I would think about it is, if you in AI, I think this is true. I think this is also true in the application era. You can think about different categories where application software, you could think about, credit card tied into expense management, where you had like Brex and Divvy, Ramp, and you guys could probably name 6 more companies. You guys probably know people who started one of these things, right? And got backed by top tier VC and money poured in. And each one of these, and I think AI is similar, and you can see it playing out even at the most foundational level and on the software side with LLM. It's different on infrastructure, on chips and data center side, because there's obviously natural barriers there. But it looks a little bit like, when you go to a baseball game and they have like that race with the hot dogs or whatever, and there's like one time the one hot dog's winning, and then the next hot dog makes a move, and the next hot dog makes a move, and you don't even know who's going to win, right? That's like the nature of the betting thing. That's a little bit like the state of where AI is right now, where there are so many different, from the horizontal side, like from the LLM side, you could talk about any one of these LLM businesses, and I could put you to sleep and wake you up in 10 years and give you 3 different outcomes and say, you wouldn't believe it, but ChatGPT is worth, or OpenAI is worth $1 trillion. You go, oh yeah, of course it is. I could tell you Microsoft bought it for $200 billion. You'd be like, oh wow, okay, I believe that. I could tell you went bankrupt. You would believe that because, and so that's kind of like the state of where I think, to a certain degree, from an investor perspective, AI is, and I think that's probably similar to what happened with application software to a certain degree, where, it takes a while, and I think it takes a while for people to develop quality of products and business models and user bases where you're developing in deep enough moats.
With fund sizes obviously going up, AI seems like an obvious place to be putting this stuff, but obviously with the conundrum we kind of just discussed there around, how do you choose who's going to win? How do you think about that? I mean, do you see, are you optimistic about this kind of era of capital invested, or are you cautious there? How do you think about cutting through the noise?
Just from a vintage?
Yeah,
I mean, okay, so now that's a different thing. Like, so having been an entrepreneur, I've started 5 companies, I've taken 2 of them public. Like what we do at Stripes, we're growth equity investors. So our sweet spot is kind of $50 to $200 million equity checks in businesses that are working. And so we're trying to get to a place where there's still a lot of upside, but you kind of know who the winner is, whether it be a consumer product and it could be a commodity market, it could be a non-commodity market, but some way your product's really differentiated, and there's intellectual property there and capabilities in the company to continue to innovate that gives you an edge. I think the venture business, obviously, it's as a broad overlay, the venture business is a bad business. And as a broad overlay, investing in the venture business, like being an LP, is a bad business. Now, obviously there are exceptions, but I think that, you look at how much liquidity these guys have generated, which is really the way to measure it. And you guys have all learned also that these marks don't mean anything, right? Like when some VC tells you your business is worth $2 billion, unless you're selling 100% of your business to him or her, it doesn't mean anything, right? And so that's the nature of the venture business too, is that, if you're not getting your money back as an investor, it's not, so I think that, and it's obvious there are firms, large and small, that are exceptions to that, but they're very few and far between. So I think that, broadly speaking, it's fairly obvious, but the firms that are going to be in the big winners are going to make a shit ton of money. And that's where you got to be, and that's a hard place to be. So, that's what you're paying them for.
I guess if growth equity is kind of the safe kind of part of the I guess, kind of technology or kind of product investing stack, how do you grapple with the fact that there are companies in this room, and there are many companies in the Thiel Fellowship that have grown from, let's say 0 to 100 million of ARR in 2 years, 3 years? How do you kind of grapple with that? It's like the metrics are there, the growth is there. They seem to have some product market fit. How do you grapple with the fact that, much of that revenue can evaporate very fast with the barriers to entry?
It's a great question. And I've learned the hard way on that too. So like our first two funds, we were kind of much more kind of what I call good to great investors, where we thought we were good operators, we're going to invest in businesses, be supportive of them. And we invest in enterprise, business, and consumer on both sides. Consumer tends to be more physical goods, just for whatever reason. We do have some big consumer digital businesses, but a lot of them are physical goods. In terms of what we look for and like how we like what we're underwriting to, we really focus on the products. So if we think the products are really differentiated on some far continuum of N of 1, and we think that that's something that they can build on and start to build trust with whoever that user base is, and therefore build brand equity around that starts to build a moat, and that's a place that we would dig in on. And that's where, like, listen, we're going to miss out on a lot of great stuff, right? Like, we probably wouldn't invest in an LLM business servicing the consumer side today because it's hard to tell who's going to win per se, and the valuations are really high, and likely there's going to be some outrageous wins there. But that's what we underwrite to. So if we had a business that was, scaled to 100 million in 2 or 3 years, we would be looking at kind of a lot of data, running a lot of surveys, going to a lot of different data sources to understand why people are buying the product, why this product's different than other products, and we don't really want to play in commodity markets.
So a lot of people in the room here, aren't operating within the noisy AI space and are building very, very interesting businesses that maybe are getting less noise and less attention right now. How do you think about your peer group? Many are getting very caught up in the kind of bubbles there, and there's a lot of distraction for people. If you're building just a really, really solid company, let's say one of your you have some incredible consumer brands in your portfolio, On Running, Levain Cookies, my personal favorite. But there's a lot of great stuff in the portfolio. How do you pay attention to those? Their multiples are so much lower. They're obviously so much less sexy in the kind of new conventional sense of that.
We run the same thesis on both sides. So, like, for us in AI, like, we have exposure to AI. We have a large position at Databricks, which we view as a foundational, and we view it as we view them very far along on a continuum of N of 1. They're not, listen, Snowflake's coming hard and their products are really good. But for unstructured data, they're pretty well positioned today. We have other application layer places like Ramp, where we think they are the winner of that category I mentioned that was like a crazy, and we waited a long time to invest there. And now we do think that AI allows them to, really automate back into the back office. But, we underwrite the same stuff, and we have 2 different teams, and the teams that are focused on AI and software is a different team that's focused on that would do A24, which is a movie business and television shows, or On for sneakers, or Vuori, which is workout athleisure clothing. But we think we're obviously underwriting the same thing. It's all product.
So you started your company obviously very young the first time around, had a lot of success, a lot of ups and downs along the way. I guess as we're thinking about a lot of very ambitious people in this room, what are the biggest kind of learnings, mistakes that you can kind of point to along the way? Obviously, you've alluded to a few of them earlier in this conversation, but I think there are a lot of people here that are having a lot of success. What are the things you'd kind of hang on to?
I do fundamentally believe that if you're going to build a really durable business, you've got to do it through differentiated product. And so I think that's one thing that's a really good measure, to stay super focused on the product. I do agree with a lot of what's been talked about with people. And I think, if you don't think you have the right person in a role, I don't know anybody who thinks that you rarely talk to people who let people go or move people out of different roles and thinks that they did it too early. So I think that's a pretty commonly, understood thing, that you want to move very quick on people. And I think that, the earlier point that was made around doing things with integrity is also important, because for all of you guys especially, it's a really long road ahead, and you want to feel good about how you do things, and you want people to say good things. You want to have a good reputation as from an integrity perspective. I think you can be a prick and you can be difficult, and I think that's all part of it. And I think, when you're younger, I think that's a pretty important part of it. I think you got to have that drive, but you can still do things honorably.
Came up a little bit earlier, and this is kind of one of the last things I want to touch upon. It came up a lot earlier about kind of sudden success, financial success specifically. Yeah. It's a very relevant point for a lot of people here. There's some incredible stats in the Thiel Fellowship now. I think nearly 10% of all Thiel Fellows have built unicorn companies now. It's a pretty incredible statistic. What's the big learning from kind of a big financial success? Kind of what are the things people can do to stay level-headed and focus on the things that are important for them? What's worked for you?
I mean, if you're building your business, I think most people, if they're still building the business, like that becomes the priority. I mean, that's why I think that continuing to take risk is really important part of that, right? Like just leaning in. And that's probably true if you sell a business also, is thinking about leaning in. I mean, That's one of the great, I think, powers of starting a business when you're 18 or 20 years old, is you actually don't know what you shouldn't be able to accomplish. And so I'm not sure like what I would say are lessons learned are that valuable. Do you know what I'm saying? Like I think the great lesson that you heard everybody talk about to a certain degree was more around persistence and keep chasing kind of bold goals, because at the end of the day, like none of these kind of like life-changing businesses, whether they be, obviously Elon's businesses or Facebook or all these businesses, the rational thing would have been to sell those businesses a long time ago and not go build giant public companies. But that's because, they didn't know what couldn't be done, right? And so that's part of the power of this. So I think it's pretty important to stay entrepreneurial. And most of you guys are probably unemployable anyway, so you have that going for you.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. I really appreciate you taking the time, and I know you're going to be hanging around for a little bit. So I'm sure if people have direct questions, I'm sure they can do it. But thanks so much for coming down and taking the time.
Cool. Appreciate it.
All right. The hard thing about hard things. Where is Mr. Jesse and Tony? All right, let's hit it. So Jesse.
Jump right in.
Yeah, that's my style, I don't do any small talk. I go right to the point.
Perfect.
So I'm never going to forget one of the most memorable Thiel Fellowship retreats in San Diego. You guys know where I'm going with this. Some people got in trouble. That's when ICOs finally, came out, and it was like a big thing. This guy over here, Jesse Limegruber, was one of the first ICOs. And then guess what happened? The SEC came after him.
It's true.
For 7 years.
7 years.
He fought them. How was that?
Oh, man. I mean, first off, I hate the SEC. It's not one of those stories you get to brag about and you kind of have to do it under the radar. I mean, picture this. It's 2017. Ethereum is doing its first run-up. Vitalik actually, was in the 2015 Thiel Fellowship batch. So a lot of people got into Ethereum early. ICOs hadn't really started yet. It was 2017, and so I decided to do one and actually try to make a high quality, bring real VCs in. We raised VC and a public token sale. So September of 2017, we ideate for the ICO. By December of 2017, we have $50 million in our bank. By January of 2017, that doubled to $100 million because Ethereum ran up. So I'm thinking, oh, this is, game changer for 22. March of 2018, 2 months later, I get that call from the SEC. Actually, they called my mom. Over the next year, Ethereum drops 90%, and our 100 million goes down to 10 million. So quite the rough start, I'd say.
Wow. The whole reason why we had Jesse on this panel was for him to just say just like how he just said it. People ask me who's the schemiest person I know. It's definitely Jesse. There's so many schemes this guy has worked on. It's amazing. So okay, let's just continue with this. So
I use the word strategies.
Yeah. And by the way, I mean that as a compliment. I have a lot of respect for him. So now your mom gets the call from the SEC. You hire, expensive lawyers, and you're at it. What happens?
So I called the lawyer, my lawyer at the time. He's kind of, I guess, in some ways the one that got us into this whole thing, right? He said we'd be fine. So I said, hey, I just got a call from the SEC. He goes, who? I'm like, the SEC. He's like, who called you? I'm like, the SEC. I was like, why are they calling you? I'm like, what? Yeah, I should be asking you that. He was panicking equally as much as we. It's bad for him, if you're the lawyer on a company that gets an SEC investigation. That's not good for your lawyer career. So I mean, look, it was 7 years. 2017. It was. You know, I kind of had a sense it was the better end of it midway through. We had to switch law firms multiple times. We spent $12 million on lawyers, cash out the door, paid out, wired to them, not some fake stat. 12 million on law firms. And you know what I learned? The law firms, the reason we had to switch 3 times, they kind of work for the SEC. You know, they deal with the SEC day in and day out. And they're ex-SEC people, a lot of them. So they know these people. And they're telling the SEC, we'll get them to settle, we'll get them to agree, we'll get them to pay this thing. And I'm like, whose side are you on? And one of the lawyers fighting the law firm. It's gaslighting.
Wow. Did you win?
We won. We won total. Total victory. Yeah, the SEC let us continue the company, keep our funds. We agreed to register. The agreement, actually, we won. There's an asterisk. The agreement was we would take the company public and be regulated by the SEC. So we actually had to go through with underwriting, audit, compliance, PCAOB, all the way through to public listing. And not the good kind of bell-ringing IPO, but you know, it was great. And we ended up taking it public 2 years later. We sold the company, successful outcome for everyone, but rough journey.
Wow. This guy needs a round of applause for sure. I just wanted Thiel Fellowship versus the SEC. That's the headline. Thiel Fellowship won.
That's right.
All right, Tony, you're up next. So let's see. How many of you know Tony? Yeah, he's sort of like under the radar. Actually, a real sort of gangster himself. Let's see. You raised what? $300 million? $500 million. Cool. Company's worth 3.3. Company's doing what? 250 million top line? And he is competing with Invisalign. Tell us a little bit about the company.
So I run a company called Dandy. It's a custom. We make teeth. It's very simple. If you go to a doctor's office or a dentist's office, you lose your tooth or you're in pain, it'll go to a dental lab. The dental lab world is hyper fragmented. It takes a long time, and the quality of product that you get back is not that great. And ultimately, what we're trying to do is break the trade-off for every single person getting dental work done, whether it's a crown, implant, denture, veneer, overall, and give you something of insanely high quality at a fair price. And so the company's, for the most part, done that and rode the digital wave of digitization of all of dentistry.
Wow, amazing. How cool is his company? Yeah, so things are going really well. It's 2021. You're raising money. Every single VC firm is trying to, get in with you. You decide to work with Green Oaks. And then, things take a little bit of a turn. And you decide to lay off hundreds of people. Tell us about that.
Yeah, definitely time I remember very deeply. So, give you some context. The company, the first 2.25 years, the company effectively went from zero to $100 million in top line. We team went from probably 50 to 1,000 people. It's an operationally intensive business, so not all of it's like engineers and stuff like this. And we were planning. This would have been the beginning of 23. We were on track again to more than double again, grow 130%. But my co-founder and I realized, the entire business is supply constrained, and I think we didn't realize how much of a truly hard problem that was initially. And so, yeah, we're walking together, and he looks at me. He's like, "Dude, we're fucked, right?" And so we made a really hard decision because we ultimately let go of 95% of our go-to-market team, 230 people. By the way, it was 2023, so the company was also burning a shit ton of money. because it was fashionable at that time. It was in vogue, and so the thing is, imagine you have at this point in time, you've got a company that's growing super quickly. It's the only thing that the world is rewarding you for. You're burning, you burn $10 million a month. You have a strong balance sheet, but at a core, the real thing was we realized it wasn't obvious that our customers deep down were raving about the product, truly fucking raving about the product, and so we decided to cut growth to less than 10%, and at the time, I'd say the vast majority of our investors told us that we should continue growing, and solve all the problems at scale, and we decided not to, and cut growth. Then 90 days later, did another riff, and my co-founder and I wrote a master plan. It was 4 steps, and we told everyone, hey, we're going to get the entire core business to be profitable in 15 months, and go from having a full third-party network to vertically integrating and owning all of our own manufacturing to produce the tune of 6,000 teeth a day, effectively. And and by the way, our CFO had been feeding narratives to the board that were not true, and so we unfortunately have to fire him. But I say this stuff because what it means is internally within your organization, no one trusts you, no one believes you, right? Everyone hates you. They're all looking for jobs, right? But at the end of the day, if you're the only way the company would ever be truly great is if we did this and we slowed the growth down to create an incredible experience for customers. And we did it. And we went from a third-party network of labs and went from a team of 80 people on the manufacturing side, and that team went to 350 people in Utah and became a 3-shift, 24/6 operation. And the business had over a 15-month time horizon, a 65% move in the margin of the business, and effectively was oh, we don't burn any money anymore. And I will tell you, it was the single most rewarding thing in my entire life. It was the hardest thing, and you're just miserable. It was so dark. I don't know how it was fucking miserable. People ask me how it was. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. The pain was really rough, and but on the flip side, you're holy shit, we did it. We fucking did it, And I remember all of our investors at the time that told us and thought, oh, let's plan this fundraise. You're gonna need to raise money again. And we looked at everyone and we're like, what do you mean? This business is entitled to compound at incredibly high rates and generate tons of free cash flow. I know it doesn't look like that this way. We're just in between. We got a lot of plains land. We got to vertically integrate, growing all this sort of stuff. And it was 12 months later to send a document back that is a capital allocation framework, because you have so much excess cash, you have to figure out what to do with it. Feels incredible. But up front, it's really hard.
Wow. What are you projecting to do in revenue in 26 and 27?
You're hitting me with this stuff has to be very confidential, but I think we've solved some incredibly hard problems in the last chunk of time. The company has now invested a ton in AI and robotics and really deep tech problems. We became the first people to inkjet print on a non-flat surface in the world. Because what makes dentistry really hard is any problem you solve, it has to be custom. And the entire industry is supply constrained, and it also needs to be done at roughly 10 microns in precision, right? And so imagine talking to an automation person or a robotics problem, and each part has to have its own custom tool path and all sorts of stuff. And so we do that. We internally, everyone's now chasing. We want to do over $2 billion in top line by 2027. That's the target.
Let's fucking go.
I think the thing is, you realize the entire industry is supply constrained, and if we've solved a couple of very simple problems that sound simple, I should be able to give someone Like, for example, take something like dentures, right? There's 12 million people get denture every single year in the United States. It's a very common process called a reline, which is you get rid of your existing denture and you need to make a new one because maybe your teeth your gums have shifted slightly. Most people go multiple days without any teeth, actually, while the local lab makes it digitally. And the cost structure to make a denture is $100 bucks. But if I can make a denture for $10 and I can have that same denture arrive the following day, 99% of the time, that's a dramatically better product and experience for those customers. And what happens, what you notice is like whenever you do that, demand increases non-linearly. And so like we've seen that. And so now that's been our focus, yeah.
Wow, congratulations again. So I guess
it hasn't happened yet, so there's nothing to congratulate on.
I mean, you're on the side of good at this point, right, from a business perspective.
It's true.
So like if you zoom out, the two of you, right, that kind of the topic of conversation here is the hard thing about hard things. You know, you're getting sued by the SEC. You're going through hundreds of...
I didn't even talk about Egypt and the Egyptian government. Dude.
There's more. How do you handle it? How do you handle the stress?
Well, the entrepreneurship, including panels like this, everyone, the history that gets told is the positive spin, right? And when you're in it, probably, it's not always going good. Most of the time it's going bad. So if you poll the room, the reality is it's probably going bad for half of you guys at any given time.
You're all fucked.
But, you have to do this outward thing. So I had to basically, like hide it for years. And it's going great. It's going great. It's going great. You guys have known me through all this period of 7 years, right? So the reality is with all these things, restructuring your whole company or running out of cash, and having no cash in the bank, there's this poem, Don't Quit. And it says, you never know how close you are. It may be near when it seems far. And this idea is that, any given day, the thing could turn around. And you just gotta, you can't relent, and you just gotta be on the front lines. And in our case, I felt that the scales tipped. My moment that I felt it tipped was I had to fly to DC, enforcement chair of the SEC across from me, company inside counsel on my right, my right-hand counsel, the outside counsel, the one that I kind of think works for the SEC on the left, SEC attorneys, enforcement chair, and it's like, this has personal downside. It's like the scene in Billions where you meet with the SEC. And, the lawyers are telling me one thing, and so I went to the bathroom like 30 minutes in, and I'm like, I kind of think there's like an orthogonal move here. Like instead of, trying to like litigate this out, which could like end very poorly, maybe, there's like 4D chess that can happen. And so the lawyers, and after the bathroom, were like, there's no 4D chess with the SEC. I mean, maybe there is, what? And so I came back after the break and was like, what if we align and we help you achieve your goals to the SEC? And they were like, didn't even really, like, they were kind of like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about, our goals? And I'm like, I propose that we are a beacon of an example for everyone, and, we align on a regulatory framework for compliance instead of enforcement. And, the lawyers kind of like stopped talking, and they were like, you're really going off script here. Point is, there's always a 4D chess move. It may be near when it seems far, and you can never tell how close you are. And so you just got to not quit and be on the front lines and just keep it going.
Wow. By the way, ladies and gents, that is called sales.
Sales.
What do you mean is when you're back?
He went in the room, he understood what his ICP wanted, and he created a solution.
Exactly.
That's amazing. That's so beautiful.
I'll give to answer the question as well. Maybe I didn't. I also agree with there's always a 4D chess move. We have one good one. But to be really honest, when things were really, really rough, I don't want to lie to anyone or say anything that wasn't true. I'm a Survivor super fan. I didn't start out as one. I've watched all 48 seasons overall. And I watched 40 seasons of Survivor in over like 9 or 12 months. It was just somehow rewarding to watch, I think subconsciously, to know someone was having it worse than me. I don't want I'm like really good friend. Dude, I started watching Naked and Afraid, like hours and hours of Naked and Afraid. And I've never watched it when I'm not in like a very dark place. But like, I think it was just so like, oh wow, like other people can have it worse, you know? And like, I think it was the feeling of like, you watch Survivor and like, oh wow, this guy just got backstabbed. Oh, that's pretty like, you know? And so I think like, you know, if it's helpful, like when it's really going through it and if you build something truly great, every single person will go through something incredibly, incredibly hard, incredibly painful. You'll have to defy certain laws of physics as well. And in those times, I don't think there's a fucking good answer. Just, you know, like I'll be honest. Like, I mean, so bad where like, there's a day where I was not able to do any work. I canceled all my meetings. I wish I could told you I was like grinding, bro. I just watched Survivor, and just thought to myself, I need to make it to the following day. And if you wake up the following day, then that day's a better day, and then you're like, oh, let's keep pushing, you know? Like I'm at the bottom of this J curve, it's gonna go the other way, and like then the organization continues to move forward. And so like I think the other side of it is knowing like, yeah, it can get dark, and there's no phenomenal answer, and everyone comes up with their own different way of coping and handling it. And I was very lucky that a co-founder was my best friend, and we continue to be best friends, and we'd look at each other and be like, dude, we're cooked. Like it's not looking good right now, you know? But then we remind ourselves, it's actually just, if you think of it in a book style form, the next chapter is going to be incredibly interesting.
How old are you, Tony?
27.
And Jesse, how old are you?
I'm 30.
Wow, old. That's such an amazing story, guys. I think, you know, just kind of zooming out and thinking about it, is it all worth it? Like, is this pursuit that we're on, this like crazy like ambition that most people in this room have, is it all worth it?
You know, it's a question of what is entrepreneurship for? Like I started companies, probably like most of you, to try to make some money, right? Like to not be poor or whatever. You know, and my sister is right there at Shelby, and she goes to me after the SEC, you know, came knocking, and she's like, the SEC only comes after people who are making way too much money too fast. And I'm like, well, maybe that's one way to look at it. So, you know, is it worth it? Like all of this, I guess, on one hand, you know, it's like not the PC thing to say, but like we live in the capitalist system, and what drives most capitalist moves is this pursuit of making money. And so is the pursuit of making money worth all of these challenges? And yeah, there's changing the world, making something people want, making the world a better place. You know, are those goals worth it? I would say that it's my personal philosophy, I'm curious to get your take too, is like there is a tier of money and company success that once you have it, like it becomes greed beyond that and it's not really worth it. But there is a certain level of lifestyle comfort that I think, you know, it's nice to be able to return investor money, get your team, you know, some wealth, have some money in your own pockets, support your family, not be struggling. So that's worth it.
Well, there's a lot of much easier ways to do it than the one you.
That's true.
You know, you can do it for a lot less. I'll tell you guys.
You guys tell the story of Wampley.
No, I'm not doing that on public television. I'm not doing that.
For another time.
I'm not doing that. That's not saying that. You track. Look, I'll tell you guys a very honest thing, which is. So I remember there was a day. Company is 18 months old. And you know, this is before. This stuff is all before AI made it like you could just go from $0 to $100 million in revenue like this. Like so back then, like we were growing very quickly, and we'd got a term sheet. It was also 2021, right? Someone called me in the middle of the day at 2 in the afternoon and was like, "Hey, here's 100 term sheet for 100 out of $1 billion," and I had been like, I started a dental company with no dental issues, right? Like, of course I'd started because I just was like, want to like grab the bag. Like, it was very simple. Like, it was just like so, and I was like, holy shit, this is a crazy large TAM, super antiquated. Everyone around me, I look at, they don't seem that bright. I think this is I could crush. And so you achieve the goal that you had always been like, dude, building a unicorn. And I'd already had it scheduled that night where like one of my favorite Afrobeats artists was coming to New York, and I had tickets, I was going. And the craziest thing was, I leave the thing, it should be the greatest day of my entire life. And I look, and all my friends will tell you, it was a crazy time. I looked at them, and I was like, oh my God, I'm on a hedonic treadmill. I'm not even happy. Like, this day, my favorite artist just played. I was like very, I got sick tickets, like, and so I think then it just made me realize, okay, well, is it really worth it? Why do you do it? And I think for me, it's just, I think you should start a company. I think it's actually, oddly enough, a very spiritual journey. You should do it primarily because you want to see yourself change and see yourself get pushed to the limits, your own personal limits. It's incredibly revealing about who you are, your own pains, insecurities, all these sorts of things. And I think and it allows you to transcend that in some ways. And I think it's just, at this point now, it's just, you fall in love with the craft. Like, I in love with the actual craft of building a company. I talk to you ad nauseum about HR and like random policies and what it will do at scale, and like why you should have, I don't think companies should have values, and I think they're better off having like leadership principles. Like I don't know, like that's a very weird thing for someone to like think about, but like you just fall in love with the craft. Oh, how does RevOps work? Like, yeah, these are all things.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I started my new company, Open Home, in AI smart speaker, physical hardware. I've never done hardware. And I'm CTO this time around. My wife is the CEO. And this time around, I'm just like so in my own head, like I'm going to be the best at hardware too. And I've never even attempted it. And the craft of pushing yourself in personal growth and learning new skills and learning every aspect from HR to finance to payroll to, accounting and audits. I agree. The journey is worth it because of the intellectual pursuit.
You have to also be curious.
Very curious, yeah.
But I mean, I think it's also just, the other thing on it is like, you get to do great, like, our lives are relative to the way they were, like, thousands of years ago, right? There's very few people are, at war. Very few people are like, generals and all sort of stuff. And I think there's like many people have this innate desire to compete. This is the gladiator arena for the average man. So you just get to do like these like very aggressive, like combative things. Like, I tell people, like, taking market share is an incredibly, like, market share is never given, it's only taken. Like, and like, it's true, right? Like, it's true. And so, and like, you say that stuff, and I think the part that is like, and so you get to just see yourself do these things you never would have thought, and like so that's it.
These are definitely men in the arena.
It's a great poem.
Fighting like gladiators. Wow. So, short answer, the people in this room, how many of you are having or have had hard times? Raise your hands.
Easiest answer.
So the tip is, number one, go watch Survivor.
If any of you guys like Survivor, I'm down to always chat about it.
40 seasons.
48, season 48.
48 seasons.
Episode 4.
Damn. Wow.
Just finished.
Number two, don't give up.
Don't give up.
All right. Well, gents, thank you so much. The
Thank
hard
you.
thing about hard things. And that concludes this amazing day. Thank you so much for all of your hard work in listening to these amazing speakers.
Hey, give it up for Zaid for hosting.
Hey, the Thiel Fellowship. Yeah.
My best friends just do
My name is Shahid Khan. I'm one of the co-founders of Loom.
Hey, Sheridan Claiborne. I was part of the 2020 Thiel Fellow class. Previously, I was working on a fintech company called Lendtable. Now I'm running an AI recruiting company called Bricks.
Hey guys, this is Ed Backel, ex-founder of Glorify.
One of the things that really helped me as a founder was just being in a tight-knit community with all the other fellows, especially when you're building a company, it's quite lonely. And being immersed in a community of people that are in similar age as you, where you can bounce ideas off of one another, has been very helpful.
The thing I've been the most surprised by with kind of building my company is how much the challenges have morphed over time. So it was a very different company when it was just me and my co-founder, to when we had 5 people, 20 people, 30 people. I think a lot of it is just like understanding management. That was something that didn't necessarily come naturally to me. So just understanding how to align a team, how to have people kind of excited around one goal, and then really just like continue to maintain momentum and continue to build.
Advice to the young girl. Start building stuff. See where you get to, keep launching things, play around, and I think eventually you'll start something that lights up and catches fire. But don't stop until you get there.